PvP or a racing game. I've been okay with PvP sometimes, but yeah. It's okay to play different games with your friends. Just do it. Today we're going to be continuing A Princess of Mars, where we left off last time. Our hero, John Carter, as opposed to John Connor from Terminator, which I will always remember that whenever I say John Carter. He had escaped from the Green Men with his princess. They were trying to escape by traveling across the land. They didn't bring enough food or water, so they were going kind of hungry and thirsty. And one of their horses, they're not horses, but their beasts of burden, collapsed, but it wasn't going to die, so they let it go. And they're traveling along, and then all of a sudden, one of the tribes or communities was seen in the distance, and they were on flat terrain. They hunkered down, hoping to be overlooked. But at the last of them was trailing past, got out an eyeglass, spotted them, and they came storming over. The princess and the one green Martian they brought with him, Sola, the nice one, the one we like. They were told to race off into the hills, and John hunkered down and shot at a bunch of the green men, but eventually they overwhelmed him and captured him. He did escape. He took off after being in captivity for quite a long. Oh, that's right. He was in captivity. He was in like a dark dungeon. Eventually, he like those green men like to put their prisoners into combat in an arena, and whoever wins gets to run away. Well, he let the person he met there, who explained to him that his princess would probably be fine based on where he let her escape. So we'll probably meet her later on. I think that was a bit of foreshadowing. He came out kind of victorious, but the person he was talking to was also a prisoner. He let him pretend to win, and so he was let free. Although we haven't seen him. They were supposed to meet up, and he didn't show up. And our friend, of course, being sneaky, pretended to die. It was dark; they couldn't really see much. And then he sort of like snuck off afterwards in the confusion of the closing of the game or whatever. He stumbled across the atmospheric generator for the planet. I think there's one main housing unit where they create the atmosphere for Mars to keep it from dying completely. Remember, the planet is in the process of dying. It generates the air and spreads it around, and there's like some outspouts somewhere around. There's a few of them around the planet, I think they said. But in his conversations with the very friendly old man, he detected, telepathically, because he's a telepath now, that the old man believes he may have given away too much information about the plant, because it's all super hush-hush because of how, devastating it would be if anything bad were to happen to the plant. So he was going to kill him. Well, armed with this foreknowledge, he managed to escape. He managed to escape and carry on his way. In his conversations with the old man, he found out, the next place he should go on the way to Helium. That's where the princess was going. But the place he had to pass through was at war with Helium. So he had to conceal his true destination. He encountered a bunch of folk, and they helped him quite readily. They gave him quite a few things, which is a little unusual. But I think we learned that this society has a very special way of handling debt. And I think they're quite happy to let you go into debt, because those who are in debt and can't pay back have to work the fields. And the government very much likes this arrangement, because there are not a lot of people who volunteer to go out and grow the food and stuff. They have to be farmers, right? The planet needs farmers for food, and no one wants to do the job. So if you can't pay back your debts, you get to go be a farmer. And I think what's happening here is, I believe, we haven't read this, so this is just a theory of mine, Sid's theory, if you will, that they are setting him up to be in debt to force him to go be farmers, not understanding that his real intent is to kind of pass through this place and move on to Helium to rejoin his princess. This is my theory. This is why you're playing so many PvE games. It's fun. It's always different every time. No meta 24/7. Yeah, and do it. Hey, bro, if that's what's fun, then do what's fun. Yes. Highly encourage fun. I'm a big fan of it myself. Personally, I'm an expert in fun. Yes. An expert. All right. All right. We are up to, where's my book? Here we go. All right. Here we go. Let's get started. Chapter 21. An air scout for Zodanga. I guess he's going to join the military, I think. Yeah. That's what it sounds like there. As I proceeded on my journey towards Zodanga, many strange and interesting sights arrested my attention. And at the several farmhouses where I stopped, I learned a number of new and instructive things concerning the methods and manners of Barsoom. That's Mars, by the way. That's what they call Mars. The water which supplies the farms of Mars is collected in immense underground reservoirs at either pole from the melting ice caps, and pumped through long conduits to the various populated centers. Along either side of these conduits and extending their entire length lie the cultivated districts. These are divided into tracts of about the same size, each tract being under the supervision of one or more government officers. These are very long pipes. Instead of flooding the surface of the fields and thus wasting immense quantities of water by evaporation, the precious liquid is carried underground through a vast network of small pipes directly to the roots of the vegetation. The crops upon Mars are always uniform, for there are no droughts, no rains, no high winds, no insects or destroying birds. The no insects thing is actually kind of a problem. Like, I think all plants on Earth have some sort of relationship with insects to like facilitate pollination. So if there are no insects, there would be no plants. Maybe they're all manually pollinated or something. On this trip, I tasted the first meat I had eaten since leaving Earth. Large, juicy steaks and chops from the well-fed domestic animals of the farms. Also, I enjoyed luscious fruits and vegetables, but not a single article of food which was exactly similar to anything on Earth. Every plant and flower and vegetable and animal had been so refined by ages of careful, scientific cultivation and breeding that the like of them on Earth dwindled into pale, gray, characterless nothingness by comparison. I mean, that would imply that they used to be comparable, which would imply that they came from Earth, or that Earth stock, all of the life on Earth came from Mars somehow. At a second stop, I met some highly cultivated people of the noble class, and while in conversation, we chanced to speak of helium. One of the older men had been there on a diplomatic mission several years before, and spoke with regret of the conditions which seemed destined ever to keep these two countries at war. Oh, John has to stop the war now. Helium, he said, rightly boasts the most beautiful women of Barsoom. That's a great resource. And all of her treasures, the wondrous daughter of Mor's Kajak, Deja Thoris, is the most exquisite flower. Oh, what a coincidence that our hero happens to have acquired the affections of the most exquisite object of beauty on the planet. Lovely. Why, he added, the people really worship the ground she walks upon, and since her loss on that ill-starred expedition, all Helium has been draped in mourning. That our ruler should have attacked the disabled fleet as it was returning to Helium was but another of his awful blunders, which I fear will sooner or later compel Zodanga to elevate a wiser man to his place. Even now, though our victorious armies are surrounding Helium, the people of Zodanga are voicing their displeasure, for the war is not a popular one, since it is not based on right or justice, Our forces took advantage of the absence of the principal fleet of Helium on their search for the princess, and so we have been able to easily reduce the city to a sorry plight. It is said she will fall with the next few passages of the further moon. Try to remember, Mars has 2 moons. One rips across the sky several times a night. That'd be the closer one. See, he could not have been attracted to her. She is just that. He could not have been not attracted to her. Right, is what you meant. I think. He was obviously going to be attracted to her. It's not his fault. That's right. And she was naked all the time. Or is, yeah. Even now, through our victorious... did I skip? Yeah, I skipped a bit. Okay. Or I went back a bit. And what, think you, may have been the fate of the Princess Deja Thoris? I asked as casually as possible. She is dead, he answered. This much was learned from a green warrior recently captured by our forces in the south. She escaped from the hordes of Thark with a strange creature of another world, only to fall into the hands of the Warhoons. Their throats were found wandering upon the sea bottom, and evidences of a bloody conflict were discovered nearby. So remember, John is now painting his body green. Sorry, not green, so red, to make it look like he's one of the red Martians to fit in. So there's very little chance that people will think he is this otherworldly person. While this information was in no way reassuring, neither was it at all conclusive proof of the death of Deja Thoris, and so I determined to make every effort possible to reach Helium as quickly as I could, and to carry Tardos Moore such news of his granddaughter's possible whereabouts as lay in my power. 10 days after leaving the 3 Pator brothers, I arrived. The 3 Pator brothers were the first farm that he encountered. I arrived at Zodanga. From the moment that I had come in contact with the red inhabitants of Mars, I had noticed that Woola drew a great amount of unwelcome attention to me, since the huge brute belonged to a species which is never domesticated by the red men. Were one to stroll down Broadway with a Numidian lion at his heels, the effect would be somewhat similar to that which I should have produced had I entered Zodanga with Woola. The very thought of parting with the faithful fellow caused me so great regret and genuine sorrow that I put it off until just before we arrived at the city's gates. But then, finally, it became imperative that we separate. Had nothing further than my own safety or pleasure been at stake, no argument could have prevailed upon me to turn away the one creature upon Barsoom that had never failed in a demonstration of affection and loyalty. But as I would willingly have offered my life in the service of her in search of whom I was about to challenge the unknown dangers of this, to me, mysterious city, I could not permit even Woola's life to threaten the success of my venture, much less his momentary happiness. For I doubted not he soon would forget me. I don't know why you would think that. It has been proven otherwise. And so I bade the poor beast an affectionate farewell, promising him, however, that if I came through my adventure in safety, that in some way I should find the means to search him out. He seemed to understand me fully. Well, it's just because you're so great at talking to dogs. And when I pointed back in the direction of Thark, he turned sorrowfully away. Nor could I bear to watch him go, but resolutely set my face towards Zodanga, and with a touch of heart-sickness approached her frowning walls. That is very sad. All because they don't like your puppy. The letter I bore from them gained me immediate entrance to the vast walled city. It was still very early in the morning, and the streets were practically deserted. The residences, raised high upon their metal columns, resembled huge rookeries. Remember, at night, all the houses, they lift up on massive columns. That's definitely the most efficient way to secure your home in the night. While the uprights themselves presented the appearance of steel tree trunks. The shops, as a rule, were not raised from the ground, nor were their doors bolted or barred, since thievery is practically unknown upon Barsoom. Then why would you lift up the houses? Assassination is the ever-present fear of all Barsoomians, and for this reason alone their homes are raised high above the ground at night or in times of danger. I'm glad it answered my question. The sentence after I stopped to ask the question. But are there just no people in the shops, I guess, at nighttime? They're just empty, so therefore there's no one to kill. Move along. Nothing of interest in this building except items of vast value and wealth. Yeah, I have my doubts. The Pator brothers had given me explicit directions for reaching the point of the city where I could find living accommodations and be near the offices of the government agents to whom they had given me letters. My way led to the central square, or plaza, which is a characteristic of all Martian cities, and many, many earthen ones too. The Plaza of Zodanga covers a square mile and is bounded by the palaces of the Jadak, the Jeds, and other members of the royalty and nobility of Zodanga, as well as by the principal public buildings, cafes, and shops. As I was crossing the great square, lost in wonder and admiration of the magnificent architecture and the gorgeous scarlet vegetation which carpeted the broad lawns, I discovered a red Martian walking briskly toward me from one of the avenues. He paid not the slightest attention to me, but as he came abreast I recognized him, and turning I placed my hand upon his shoulder, calling out, "Kaor? Kantos Khan?" Like lightning he wheeled, and before I could so much as lower my hand, the point of his longsword was at my breast. "Who are you?" he growled. And then as a backward leap carried me 50 feet from his sword, he dropped the point to the ground and exclaimed, laughing, "I do not need a better reply, but there is one man upon all Barsoom who can bounce about like a rubber ball. By the mother of the further moon, John Carter, how came you here? And have you become a Darsine, that you can change your color at will?" I guess a Darsine is a chameleon-type creature. You gave me a bad half minute, my friend," he continued, after I had briefly outlined my adventures since parting with him in the arena at Warhoon. So we've met up with our friend after all. That's good. Were my name and city known to the Zodangans, I would shortly be sitting on the banks of the lost sea of Chorus with my revered and departed ancestors. I am here in the interest of Tardos Moors, Jadak of Helium, to discover the whereabouts of Deja Thoris, our princess. Sab Than, Prince of Zodanga, has her hidden in the city and has fallen madly in love with her. His father, Than Kosis, Jadak of Zodanga, has made her voluntary marriage to his son the price of peace between our countries. But Tardos Moors will not accede to the demands and has sent word that he and his people would rather look upon the dead face of their princess than see her wed to any than her own choice. And that, personally, he would prefer being engulfed in the ashes of a lost and burning helium to joining the metal of his house with that of Thankosis. That's not really a very mature way to go about politics, honestly. His reply was of the deadliest affront, and deadliest affront he could have put upon Thankosis and the Zodangans, but his people love him the more for it, and his strength in helium is greater today than ever. I have been here 3 days, continued Kantos Khan, but I have not yet found where Deja Thoris is imprisoned. Today I joined the Zodangan Navy as an air scout, and I hope in this way to win the confidence of Sab Than, the prince, who is commander of this division in the Navy, and thus learn the whereabouts of Deja Thoris. He's been a busy little fellow. Yeah, problem solved. Yeah, we don't even need to go to helium yet. I'm glad that you are here, John Carter, for I know your loyalty to my princess, and two of us working together should be able to accomplish much. Ah, he's been drafted. He's been conscripted all of a sudden. Bold of him to assume that John isn't actually siding with here, why can I not remember the name of the Zodangan, because the princess is here, and perhaps John is the one who's going to marry the princess, and Zodangan is just using it as leverage against Helium. I guess thus is the trust that John Carter imparts upon those he wishes to. Or perhaps my brain turns over too many times. The plaza was now commencing to fill with people going and coming upon the daily activities of their duties. The shops were opening and the cafes filling with early morning patrons. Kanto's Kan led me to one of these gorgeous eating places where we were served entirely by mechanical apparatus. Ooh, AI. No hand touched the food from the time it entered the building in its raw state until it emerged hot and delicious upon the tables before the guests, in response to the touching of tiny buttons to indicate their desires. After our meal, Kanto's Kan took me with him to the headquarters of the Air Scout Squadron, and introducing me to his superior, asked that I be enrolled as a member of the Corps. In accordance with custom, an examination was necessary, but Kanto's Kan had told me to have no fear on this score, as he would attend to that part of the matter. He accomplished this by taking my order for examination to the examining officer and representing himself as John Carter. This ruse will be discovered later, he cheerfully explained, when they check upon my weights, measurements, and other personal identification data, but it will be several months before this is done, and our mission should be accomplished or have failed long before that time. The next few days were spent by Kanto's Kan in teaching me the intricacies of flying and repairing the dainty little contrivances which the Martians use for this purpose. The body of the one-man aircraft is about 16 feet long, 2 feet wide, and 3 inches thick, tapering to a point at each end. The driver sits on top of this plane upon a seat constructed over the small, noiseless radium engine which propels it. The medium of buoyancy is contained within the thin metal walls of the body and consists of the 8th Barsumium ray, or ray of propulsion, as it may be termed in view of its properties. That's right. So the 8th ray is like an 8th color that we can't describe and does propulsion things. The 9th ray we learned back at the atmosphere factory produces atmosphere somehow and is like a 9th color, right? Like in addition to like the 7 colors of the rainbow. So yeah, it's almost like think Cthulhu colors, which are colors that cannot be described, but you can still see. Right. We do have ads coming up soon, and I have a do not disturb setting to set on my phone. So we're going to pop the ads on, take a little break, do a little bio, and we will be back. I guess ultraviolet or infrared. It would be, I think, ultraviolet and then ultraviolet. So even because it's in order, right? Yeah, the first 7 colors. And then I think, is blue the longer ones, or red? Oh, it's the red, right? Red is the longer frequency, which I forget which is which. But it's like, because the 8th and the 9th come after the 7th. So I think whichever one is longer is the 8th. And then something beyond that, which is even more non-visible, would be the 9th. That would be my interpretation of it as I believe I remember. Red is long, so yeah, it would be infrared, and then like, I don't know, deep infrared or something, whatever we describe that the next band of light would be. That would be what I would say. All right, that is my theory. Radio. He sees the radio. All right, we're gonna do ads. We'll be back. Don't go, or do go away. Go get a drink or something. Yes. Snack. We're back from ads. Sorry for being a little late. I noticed that my ping. I noticed why I got a ping. I was sort of just taking a little bit of a closer look at that. A lot of people streaming tonight. Must be Monday. like minimize the browser by mistake. All right, the phone is on Do Not Disturb. Where are we? Right, the 8th ray. This ray, like the 9th ray, is unknown on Earth. But the Martians have discovered that it is an inherent property of all light. Oh, excuse me. No matter from where the... Nope, my eyes turned inside out, my bad. But the Martians have discovered that it is an inherent property of all light, no matter from what source it emanates. They have learned that it is the solar 8th ray which propels the light of the sun to the various planets, and that it is the individual 8th ray of each planet which reflects, in quotes, or propels the light thus obtained out into space once more. The solar 8th ray would be absorbed by the surface of Barsoom, but the Barsoomian 8th ray, which tends to propel light from Mars into space, is constantly streaming out from the planet, constituting a force of repulsion of gravity, which then confined is able to lift enormous weights from the surface of the ground. So the author was high when he wrote that, right? It's kind of interesting. This kind of science, this is technically science fiction. It reminds me of Star Trek. This sounds like it's trying to be hard science, hard sci-fi, which is science fiction based on at least the principles you understand, and you're trying to extrapolate them into the future. Because this was done just after the Civil War. I'm not sure how advanced they were with electricity and research into light, but it sounds like if I would just barely knew about light and electricity, I might make some of these assumptions that we've read in this story. Yeah, it's from before most people knew about those things. And hey, today we barely know about some things like quantum science and nuclear science and physics and all that kind of jazz, right? And Star Trek did the same type of thing. They talk about things like tachyon rays and stuff, right? Like tachyons are a thing. I'm not sure you can turn them into a ray, but you know, neither did the authors. They still shot them out of panels and stuff. You know what I mean? So it kind of reminds me of that kind of thing. I wonder, we know more about light and electricity. Everyone with a grade 3 understanding of education knows more about light and electricity than the author of this book did. Assuming the author of this book was trying to use hard, he could just be using soft science fiction, in which case he just comes up with whatever sounds good for him. But I'm not sure what the fashion of the day was. I shouldn't assume that just because we like hard science fiction in general, so too did our ancestors. Anyways, this 8th ray is special on Mars. It is this ray which has enabled them to so perfect aviation that battleships far outweighing anything known upon Earth sail as gracefully and lightly through the thin air of Barsoom as a toy balloon in the heavy atmosphere of Earth. During the early years of the discovery of this ray, many strange accidents occurred before the Martians learned to measure and control the wonderful power they had found. In one instance, some 900 years before the first great battleship to be built with 8th ray reservoirs was stored with too great a quantity of the rays, and she had sailed up from Helium with 500 officers and men, never to return. Funny that happened in Helium. Her power of repulsion for the planet was so great that it had carried her far into space, where she can be seen today by the aid of powerful telescopes hurtling through the heavens 10,000 miles from Mars, a tiny satellite that will thus encircle Barsoom to the end of time. Well, at least they got a hell of a trip. Once in a lifetime. The 4th day after my arrival at Zodanga, I made my first flight. As a result of it, I won a promotion which included quarters in the palace of Thankosis. They're very giving. As I rose above the city, I circled several times as I had seen Kanto's can do, and then throwing my engine into top speed, I raced at terrific velocity toward the south, following one of the great waterways which entered Zodanga from that direction. I had traversed perhaps 200 miles in little less than an hour when I descried far below me a party of 3 green warriors racing madly towards a small figure on foot, which seemed to be trying to reach the confines of one of the walled fields. Dropping my machine rapidly toward them and circling to the rear of the warriors, I soon saw that the object of their pursuit was a red Martian wearing the metal of the scout squadron to which I was attached. I was so sure it was going to be Tharja. or Thasia. The princess. It was some events in this book are a little too convenient, I think. A short distance away lay his tiny flyer, surrounded by the tools with which he had evidently been preoccupied in repairing some damage when surprised by the green warriors. They were now almost upon him, their flying mounts charging down on the relatively puny figure at terrific speed, while the warriors leaned low to the right with their great metal-shod spears. Each seemed striving to be the first to impale the poor Zodangan, and in another moment his fate would have been sealed had it not been for my timely arrival. Ah, thus enters the hero at the pivotal moment. John leaping to the rescue indeed. Well, he wouldn't be hero if it didn't happen, I guess. Driving my fleet aircraft at high speed directly behind the warriors, I soon overtook them, and without diminishing my speed, I rammed the prow of my little flyer between the shoulders of the nearest. The impact, sufficient to have torn through inches of solid steel, hurled the fellow's headless body into the air over the head of his throat, where it fell, sprawling upon the moss. The mounts of the other 2 warriors turned, squealing in terror, and bolted in opposite directions. Reducing my speed, I circled and came to the ground at the feet of the astonished Zodangan. Bet you he's the prince. I'm calling it now. I bet you he's the prince. He was warm in his thanks for my timely aid, and promised that my day's work would bring the reward it merited. Decapitated by skyboat. Yes, obviously, right? And the boat is obviously okay. It merited, for it was none other than a cousin of the Jadak of Zodanga, whose life I had saved. Oh, okay, close enough. We wasted no time in talk, as we knew the warriors would surely return as soon as they had gained control of their mounts. Hastening to his damaged machine, we were bending every effort to finish the needed repairs and had almost completed them when we saw the 2 green monsters returning at top speed from opposite sides of us. When they had approached within 100 yards, their throats again became unmanageable and absolutely refused to advance further toward their mounts. I guess not. Oh, their thoats. Thoat, not their throat. Okay, yeah, their thoats are their mounts. Became unmanageable and absolutely refused to advance further toward the aircraft which had frightened them. Yes, that's not really a reasonable reaction for a mount bred for war, I don't think. Yeah. The warriors finally dismounted and, hobbling their animals, advanced toward us on foot with drawn longswords. I advanced to meet the larger, telling the Zodangan to do the best he could with the other, finishing my man with almost no effort. Swing! I'm done now. As had now from much practice become habitual with me, I hastened to return to my new acquaintance, whom I found indeed in desperate straits, because only I can fight them successfully and with zing. Because they're actual John's thoughts. Tahats. Thoats. It is spelled, I think, Thoat. Where can I find it? Up a bit. Yeah, thoats or thoates. Thoats. Yeah, definitely look that up in the dictionary. I'm sure it's there. So he was in desperate straits. He was wounded and down with the huge foot of his antagonist upon his throat, and the great longsword raised to deal the final thrust. With a bound, I cleared the 50 feet intervening between us. God, that battle spread out. And with outstretched point drove my sword completely through the body of the green warrior. His sword fell, harmless, to the ground as he sank limply upon the prostrate form of the Zodangan. Which we know his name, but we're not going to call him by name, I guess. A cursory examination of the latter revealed no mortal injuries, and after a brief rest, he asserted that he felt fit to attempt the return voyage. He would have to pilot his own craft, however, as these frail vessels are not intended to convey but a single person, but are actually still fully capable of decapitating giant lizard men, despite being frail. Like, maybe it's not frail. Maybe it's, like, small, right? You can't really put two people on it, but they're really sturdy. Because, bro, that was a sturdy craft. You can't decapitate things like that with like, something that's frail. Quickly completing the repairs, we rose together into the still, cloudless Martian sky, and at great speed and without further mishap returned to Zodangan. As we neared the city, we discovered a mighty concourse of civilians and troops assembled upon the plain before the city. The sky was black with naval vessels and private and public pleasure craft, flying long streamers of gay-colored silks and banners and flags of odd and picturesque design. My companion signaled that I slow down, and running his machine close beside mine suggested that we approach and watch the ceremony, which, he said, was for the purpose of conferring honors on individual officers and men for bravery and other distinguished service. He then unfurled a little ensign which denoted that his craft bore a member of the royal family of Zodangan. Prince, I said, Prince. And together we made our way through the maze of low-lying air vessels until we hung directly over the Jadak of Zodangan and his staff. All were mounted upon the small domestic bull-thoats of the Red Martians, and their trappings and ornamentation bore such a quantity of gorgeously colored feathers that I could not but be struck with the startling resemblance the concourse bore to a band of the Red Indians of my own earth. Yeah, Native Americans is what he meant to say. One of the staff called the attention of Than Kosis to the presence of my companion above them, and the ruler motioned for him to descend. As they waited for the troops to move into position facing the Jadak, the two talked earnestly together, the Jadak and his staff occasionally glancing up at me. I could not hear their conversation, and presently it ceased, and all dismounted. As the last body of troops had wheeled into position before their emperor, a member of the staff advanced towards the troops, and calling the name of a soldier commanded him to advance. The officer then recited the nature of the heroic act which had won the approval of the Jadak, and the latter advanced and placed a metal ornament upon the left arm of the lucky man. 10 men had been so decorated when the aide called out, "John Carter, Air Scout." We're going to skip most of the whole process, and we're just going to go straight to the reward at this point. Yeah, I guess. 10 seconds in the military is getting a reward. Never in my life had I been so surprised. But the habit of military... So really? You were not more surprised when you suddenly ended up on the planet of Mars after looking at it in the sky? Perhaps that might be a little more surprising. Just a tad. He did an important thing, but like, never have I been more surprised. I don't know, friend. I don't believe you. But the habit of military discipline is strong within me. That I do believe. He is from one of the Civil War armies in the South. And I dropped my little machine lightly to the ground and advanced on foot as I had seen the others do. As I halted before the officer, he addressed me in a voice audible to the entire assemblage of troops and spectators. Are they going to have a medal for him, even though this was totally unplanned? In recognition, John Carter, he said, of your remarkable courage and skill in defending the person of the cousin of the Jadak Than Kosis and, single-handed, vanquishing 3 green warriors, it is the pleasure of our Jadak to confer on you the mark of his esteem. Than Kosis then advanced toward me and placed an ornament upon me, said. Of course, just give him a title, yeah. My cousin has narrated the details of your wonderful achievement, which seems little short of miraculous. And if you can so well defend a cousin of the Jadak, how much better could you defend the person of the Jadak himself? You are therefore appointed a Padwar of the guards, and will be quartered in my palace hereafter. Like, maybe he doesn't want to do that. Anyways, I thanked him, and at his discretion joined the members of his staff. After the ceremony, I returned my machine to its quarters on the roof of the barracks of the Air Scout Squadron, and with an orderly from the palace to guide me, I reported to the officer in charge of the palace. I sure hope that doesn't advance the inspection of his measurements and so forth. Gosh, it would suck to suddenly find out that you're a spy. Kinda awkward. Chapter 22. I find Deja. The major domo to whom I reported had been given instructions to station me near the person of the Jadak, who, in time of war, is always in great danger of assassination. As the rule that all is fair in war seems to constitute the entire ethics of Martian conflict. I butchered that sentence, but assassinations are fair game. Because war ethics, yes. It's a wild concept. He therefore escorted me immediately to the apartment in which Than Kosis then was. The ruler was engaged in conversation with his son, Sab Than, and several courtiers of his household, and did not perceive my entrance. Now, I believe Sab Than is the prince, so I was still mistaken beforehand. He saved a cousin, and then his heroism in saving the cousin has given him this in to not just access to the prince, assuming Sab Than is the prince, but the Jadak himself. The walls of the apartment were completely hung with splendid tapestries which hid any windows or doors which may have pierced them. The room was lighted by imprisoned rays of sunshine held between the ceiling proper and what appeared to be a ground glass false ceiling a few inches below. That is kind of an interesting, kind of beautiful picture. The idea that you could hang rays of light as though they were curtains, perhaps. My guide drew aside one of the tapestries, disclosing a passage which encircled the room, between the hangings and the walls of the chamber. Within this passage I was to remain, he said, so long as Than Kosis was in the apartment. I added extra pauses there unnecessarily. He hangs out in the hidden wall, in like the hidden chamber, the hidden wall chamber, while the doohicker's in the apartment. When he left, I was to follow. My only duty was to guard the ruler and keep out of sight as much as possible. I would be relieved after a period of 4 hours. The majordomo then left me. Bro, what about the buddy system? You have to have a buddy system, right? The tapestries were of a strange weaving which gave the appearance of heavy solidity from one side, but from my hiding place I could perceive all that took place within the room as readily as though there had been no curtain intervening. Scarcely had I gained my post than the tapestry at the opposite end of the chamber separated, and 4 soldiers of the guard entered, surrounding a female figure. As they approached Than Kosis, the soldiers fell to either side, and there, standing before the Jadak and not 10 feet from me, her beautiful face radiant with smiles, was Deja Thoris. Sab Than, Prince of Zodanga, advanced to meet her, and hand in hand they approached close to the Jadak. Thankosis looked up in surprise and, rising, saluted her. To what strange freak do I owe this visit from the Princess of Helium, who, 2 days ago, with rare consideration for my pride, assured me that she would prefer Tal Hajas, the Green Thark, to my son? Deja Thoris only smiled the more, and with the roguish dimples playing at the corners of her mouth, she made answer. From the beginning of time upon Barsoom, it has been the prerogative of women to change her mind as she listed and to dissemble in matters concerning her heart, that you will forgive Thankosis, as has your son. 2 days ago, I was not sure of his love for me, but now I am, and I have come to beg of you to forget my rash words and to accept the assurance of the Princess of Helium that when the time comes she will wed Sabthan, Prince of Zodanga. Okay, so Sabthan is Prince. I was eventually right. I am glad that you have so decided, replied Thankosis. It is far from my desire to push war further against the people of Helium, and your promise shall be recorded and a proclamation to my people issued forthwith. It were better, Thankosis, interrupted Deja Thoris, that the proclamation wait the ending of this war. It would look strange indeed to my people and to yours for the Princess of Helium to give herself to her country's enemy in the midst of hostilities. Cannot the war be ended at once? Spoke Sabthan. It requires but the word of Thankosis to bring peace. Say it, my father. Say the word that will hasten my happiness and end this unpopular strife. What just hit me there is Sabthan was happy for the war to continue, but hey, I get a babe to put into my bedroom. Yeah, we can. Can we hurry and stop killing people so I could go bang the hottie from Helium? Oh, there's the title, the hottie from Helium. Yes. Nothing like good old objectivity and definitely the moral high ground. Yeah, let's pretend it's the moral high ground. And this unpopular strife. Now I agree that it's unpopular. We shall see, replied Thankosis, how the people of Helium take to peace. I shall at least offer it to them. Deja Thoris, after a few words, turned and left the apartment, still followed by her guards. Thus was the edifice of my brief dream of happiness dashed, broken, to the ground of reality. The woman for whom I had offered my life, and from whose lips I had so recently heard a declaration of love for me, had lightly forgotten my very existence, and smilingly given herself to the son of her people's most hated enemy. And the thought that she thinks you're dead because she hasn't seen you in ages and is doing what's best for her people probably counts for nothing, eh? Yeah, dude, she think you dead. Well, she should have faith and trust in my ability to survive as the protagonist of this story, damn it. Probably. Says John Carter. Probably. Although I had heard it with my own ears, I could not believe it. I must search out her apartments and force her to repeat the cruel truth to me alone before I would be convinced. And so I deserted my post and hastened through the passage behind the tapestries toward the door by which she had left the chamber. Slipping quietly through this opening, I discovered a maze of winding corridors, branching and turning in every direction. Abandoning your post is probably going to cause you more problems. It's only a 4-hour shift. You can wait a little while, right? The politics are not going anywhere. Right, soldier first. Well, just kind of if you need to spend more time here, then you just left the king undefended. If you don't get executed for that, especially on a planet like this, I don't know what will. I don't know what would get you executed, I mean. Running rapidly down first one, and then another of them, I soon became hopelessly lost and was standing, panting against the side wall, when I heard voices near me. Apparently, They were coming from the opposite side of the partition against which I leaned, and presently I made out the tones of Dejah Thoris. I could not hear the words, but I knew that I could not possibly be mistaken in the voice. Moving on a few steps, I discovered another passageway, at the end of which lay a door. Walking boldly forward, I pushed into the room only to find myself in a small antechamber, in which were the 4 guards who had accompanied her. One of them instantly arose and accosted me, asking the nature of my business. "I am from Thancosis," I replied, "and wish to speak privately with Dejah Thoris, Princess of Helium." "And your order?" asked the fellow. I did not know what he meant, but I replied that I was a member of the guard, and without waiting for a reply from him, I strode toward the opposite door of the antechamber, behind which I could hear Dejah Thoris conversing. But my entrance was not to be so easily accomplished. The guardsman stepped before me, saying, "No one comes from Thancosis without carrying an order or the password. You must give me one or the other before you may pass." "The only order I require, my friend, to enter where I will, hangs at my side," I answered, tapping my longsword. "Will you let me pass in peace or no?" For reply, he whipped out his own sword, calling to the others to join him, and thus the 4 stood, with drawn weapons, barring my further progress. "You are not here by the order of Thancosis," cried the one who had first addressed me, "and not only shall you not enter the apartments of the Princess of Helium, but you shall go back to Thancosis under guard to explain this unwarranted temerity. Throw down your sword. You cannot hope to overcome 4 of us," he added with a grim smile. Yeah, and he failed bluff again. Yeah, like, bro. My reply was a quick thrust which left me but 3 antagonists, and I can assure you that they were worthy of my mettle. No, I'm not going to do the power comparison between the average green warrior and the average red warrior compared to John. They had backed against the wall in no time, fighting for my life. They had me backed against the wall in no time, fighting for my life. Slowly, I worked my way to a corner of the room where I could force them to come at me only 1 at a time, probably 2, and thus we fought upward of 20 minutes, the clanging of steel and steel producing a veritable bedlam in the little room. The noise had brought Dejah Thoris to the door of her apartment, and there she stood throughout the conflict, with Sola at her back, peering over her shoulder. Her face was set and emotionless, and I knew that she did not recognize me. Nor did Sola. Finally, a lucky cut brought down the 2nd guardsman, and then, with only 2 opposing me, I changed my tactics and rushed them down after the fashion of my fighting that had won me many a victory. The 3rd fell within 10 seconds after the 2nd, and the last lay dead upon the bloody floor a few moments later. They were brave men and noble fighters, and it grieved me that I had been forced to kill them, but I would have willingly depopulated all Barsoom could I have reached the side of my Dejah Thoris in no other way. Sheathing my bloody blade, which he should have cleaned, I advanced toward my Martian princess, who still stood mutely gazing at me, without sign of recognition. Yeah, and no one else came. Well, you see, Valena, the noise was restricted to the little room. Obviously, noise can't leave the little room. The doors are closed. You can't go through a closed door, right? It's impossible. "Who are you, Zodangan?" she whispered. "Another enemy to harass me in my misery?" "I am a friend," I answered. "A once cherished friend." No friend. She can't recognize his voice by now, or like the shape of his face. Jesus. "No friend of Helium's princess wears that medal," she replied. "And yet the voice. I have heard it before. It is not. It cannot be. No, for he is dead." All right, that's fair. If you think someone's dead and they don't look like them, you can your brain can assume that people sound familiar or similar to one another. Yeah, and you can. Okay, I'm okay with her not recognizing him now. Yeah. "It is, though, my princess, none other than John Carter," I said. Do you not recognize, even through paint and strange metal, the heart of your chieftain? As I came close to her, she swayed toward me with outstretched hands. But as I reached to take her in my arms, she drew back with a shudder and a little moan of misery. Too late, she grieved. Oh, my chieftain that was, and whom I thought dead, had you but returned one little hour before. But now it is too late. Too late. What do you mean, Deja Thoris? I cried. That you would not have promised yourself to the Zodangan prince had you known that I lived? Think you, John Carter, that I would give my heart to you yesterday and today to another? I thought that it lay buried with your ashes in the pits of Warhoon, and so today I have promised my body to another to save my people from the curse of a victorious Zodangan army. But I am not dead, my princess. I have come to claim you, and all Zodangan cannot prevent it. It is too late, John Carter. My promise is given, and on Barsoom that is final. The ceremonies which follow later are but meaningless formalities. They make the fact of marriage no more certain than does the funeral cortege of a Jadak again place the seal of death upon him. I am as good as married, John Carter. No longer may you call me your princess. No longer are you my chieftain. I know but little of your customs here upon Barsoom, Deja Thoris, but I do know that I love you. And if you meant the last words you spoke to me that day as the hordes of Warhoon were charging down upon us, no other man shall ever claim you as his bride. You meant them then, my princess, and you mean them still. Say that is true. I meant them, John Carter, she whispered. I cannot repeat them now, for I have given myself to another. If you had only known our ways, my friend, she continued, half to herself. The promise would have been yours long months ago, and you could have claimed me before all others. It might have meant the fall of Helium, but I would have given my empire for my Tharkian chief. They're very dramatic. Then aloud she said, Do you remember the night when you offended me? You called me your princess without having asked my hand of me. And then you boasted that you had fought for me. You did not know, and I should not have been offended. I see that now. But there was no one to tell you what I could not. That upon Barsoom there are two kinds of women in the cities of red men. The one they fight for, that they may ask them in marriage, and the other kind they fight for also, but never ask their hands. When a man has won a woman, he may address her as his princess, or in any of the several terms which signify possession. You had fought for me, but had never asked me in marriage. So when you called me your princess, you see, she faltered, I was hurt. But even then, John Carter, I did not repulse you, as I should have done, until you made it doubly worse by taunting me with having won me through combat. Yeah, political marriage, and then cuck the prince. Yeah, okay, Valena, calm down. I do not need ask your forgiveness now, Deja Thoris, I cried. You must know that my fault was of ignorance of your Barsoomian customs. What I failed to do through implicit belief that my petition would be presumptuous and unwelcome, I do now, Deja Thoris. I ask you to be my wife, and by all the Virginian fighting blood that flows in my veins, you shall be. No, John Carter, it is useless, she cried hopelessly. I may never be yours while Sab Than lives. Oh, I've detected a solution to the problem. Just kill the people you've sworn to protect. A loophole, yeah. You have sealed his death warrant, my princess. Sab Than dies. Nor that either, she hastened to explain. I may not wed the man who slays my husband. Even in self-defense, it is custom. We are ruled by custom upon Barsoom. It is useless, my friend. You must bear the sorrow with me. That at least we may share in common. That and the memory of the brief days among the Tharks. You must go now, nor ever see me again. Goodbye, my chieftain that was. That's a very convenient custom to kind of like put a wedge in that, to put a wrench in that plan. Disheartened and dejected, I withdrew from the room. But I was not entirely discouraged, nor would I admit the Deja Thoris was lost to me until the ceremony had actually been performed. And see, that's a misunderstanding of the custom too. Loophole. Yeah, the other guy kills the prince. Yeah, I was thinking the same damn thing. So it just can't be me that kills him, right? As I wandered along the corridors, I was absolutely lost in the mazes of winding passageways, as I had been before I discovered Deja Thoris's apartments. Like, I'm thinking to myself, you're wandering? You just killed 4 guards guarding the princess of an insanely important political maneuver. After abandoning the king that you were supposed to be guarding for 4 hours, after having been known for 20 minutes. I would not be wandering anywhere. I would be terrified at the consequences of my own actions. I knew that my only hope lay in escape from the city of Zodanga, for the matter of the 4 dead guardsmen would have to be explained, and as I could never reach my original post without a guide, suspicion would surely rest on me so soon as I was discovered wandering aimlessly through the palace. Presently, I came upon a spiral runway leading to a lower floor. There's also the matter of, like, all these people are telepathic, except they can't read John. That would engender a great distrust of him, right? It would be kind of like, why are they trusting him with this position just because of a few feats of strength? Yeah. It doesn't matter how bold your actions are. If you can perceive another person's thoughts, that is very convincing as to whether they're trustworthy or not. And if you cannot read their thoughts, well, you have no idea who they are, right? Would you hire Secret Service guardsmen to protect your leader if you couldn't do a background check on them? If that was just blank? I don't think so. Presently, I came upon a spiral runway leading to a lower floor, and this I followed downward for several stories until I reached the doorway of a large apartment in which were a number of guardsmen. The walls of this room were hung with transparent tapestries behind which I secreted myself without being apprehended. The conversation of the guardsmen was general, and awakened no interest in me until an officer entered the room and ordered 4 of the men to relieve the detail who were guarding the Princess of Helium. Now I knew my troubles would commence in earnest, and indeed they were upon me all too soon. For it seemed that the squad had scarcely left the guard room before one of their number burst in again breathlessly, crying that they had found their 4 comrades butchered in the antechamber. In a moment, the entire palace was alive with people. Guardsmen, officers, courtiers, servants, and slaves ran helter-skelter through the corridors and apartments carrying messages and orders and searching for signs of the assassin. If nothing else, like, assassination is fair play, right? So it's probably not looked down upon so much. This was my opportunity, and slim as it appeared, I grasped it. For, as a number of soldiers came hurrying past my hiding place, I fell in behind them and followed through the mazes of the palace until, in passing through a great hall, I saw the blessed light of day coming in through a series of larger windows. Here I left my guides, and, slipping to the nearest window, sought for an avenue of escape. The windows opened upon a great balcony which overlooked one of the broad avenues of Zodanga. The ground was about 30 feet below, and at a like distance from the building was a wall fully 20 feet high, constructed of polished glass about a foot in thickness. To a red Martian, escape by this path would have appeared impossible. But to me, with my earthly strength and agility, it seemed already accomplished. My only fear was in being detected before darkness fell, for I could not make the leap in broad daylight while the court below and the avenue beyond were crowded with Zodangans. Accordingly, I searched for a hiding place and finally found one by accident inside a huge hanging ornament which swung from the ceiling of the hall, and about 10 feet from the floor. Into the capacious bowl-like vase I sprang with ease, and scarcely had I settled down within it than I heard a number of people enter the apartment. The group stopped beneath my hiding place, and I could plainly overhear their every word. It is the work of Heliumites. We'll go with Heliumites, said one of the men. Yes, O Jadak, but how had they access to the palace? I could believe that even with the diligent care of your guardsmen, a single enemy might reach the inner chambers, but how a force of 6 or 8 fighting men could have done so unobserved is beyond me. We shall soon know, however, for here comes the royal psychologist. It's a good thing no one can read his psychology. Another man now joined the group, and after making his formal greetings to his ruler, said, "O mighty Jadak, it is a strange tale I read in the dead minds of your faithful guardsmen. They were felled not by a number of fighting men, but by a single opponent. Oh, he's a necromancer. He is no... Oh, damn. You can read dead brains. That's crazy." He paused to let the full weight of this announcement impress his hearers, and that his statement was scarcely credited was evidenced by the impatient exclamation of incredulity which escaped the lips of Than Kosis. "What manner of weird tale are you bringing me, Notan?" he cried. "It is the truth, my Jadak," replied the psychologist. "In fact, the impressions were strongly marked on the brain of each of the 4 guardsmen. Their antagonist was a very tall man, wearing the metal of one of your own guardsmen, and his fighting ability was little short of marvelous, for he fought fair against the entire 4 and vanquished them by his surpassing skill and superhuman strength and endurance. Though he wore the metal of Zodangan, my Jadak, such a man was never seen before in this or any other country upon Barsoom." How would you know that? And also technically not true. The mind of the Princess of Helium, whom I have examined and questioned, was a blank to me. She has perfect control, and I could not read one iota of it. She said that she witnessed a portion of the encounter, and that when she looked there was but one man engaged with the guardsmen, a man whom she did not recognize as ever having seen. She's learned to lie. Toxic human influence. No matter where we go, we ruin everything. "Where is my erstwhile savior?" spoke another of the party, and while I recognized the voice of the cousin of Than Kosis, whom I had rescued from the Green Warriors. "By the metal of my first ancestor," he went on. "But the description fits him to perfection, especially as to his fighting ability." "Where is this man?" cried Than Kosis. "Have him brought to me at once. What know you of him, cousin? It seems strange to me now that I think upon it that there should have been such a fighting man in Zodanga. Of whose name, even? We were ignorant before today, and his name too, John Carter. Who ever heard of such a name upon Barsoom? Now you ask questions. What a weird, strange people." Word was soon brought that I was nowhere to be found, either in the palace or at my former quarters in the barracks of the Air Scout Squadron. Kantos Khan they had found and questioned, but he knew nothing of my whereabouts, and as to my past, he had told them he knew little as well, since he had but recently met me during our captivity among the Warhoons. "Keep your eyes on this other one," commanded Than Kosis. "He also was a stranger, and likely as they both hail from Helium. And where one is, We shall sooner or later find the other. Quadruple the air patrol. Let every man who leaves the city by air or ground be subjected to the closest scrutiny. Another messenger now entered with word that I was still within the palace walls. How the hell does he know that? The likeness of every person who has entered or left the palace grounds today has been carefully examined, concluded the fellow, and not one approaches the likeness of this new podwar of the guards, other than that which was recorded of him at the time he entered. Then we will have him shortly, commented Thankosis contentedly, and in the meanwhile we will prepare to the apartments of the Princess of Helium and question her in regard to the affair. She may know more than she cared to divulge to you, Notan. Come. They left the hall, and, as darkness had fallen without, I slipped lightly from my hiding place and hastened to the balcony. Few were in sight, and choosing a moment when none seemed near, I sprang quickly to the top of the glass wall, and from there to the avenue beyond the palace grounds. Chapter 23. Lost in the Sky. Wonder if he gets away. Without effort at concealment, I hastened to the vicinity of our quarters, where I felt sure I should find Kantos Kan. As I neared the building, I became more careful, as I judged, and rightly, that the place would be guarded. Several men in civilian metal loitered near the front entrance, and in the rear were others. My only means of reaching, unseen, the upper story were our apartments were situated. My only means of reaching, unseen, the upper story where our apartments were situated was through an adjoining building, and after considerable maneuvering, I managed to attain the roof of a shop several doors away. Leaping from roof to roof, I soon reached an open window in the building where I hoped to find the Heliumite, and in another moment I stood in the room before him. He was alone and showed no surprise at my coming, saying he had expected me much earlier, as my tour of duty must have ended some time since. I saw that he knew nothing of the events of the day at the palace, and when I had enlightened him, he was all excitement. The news that Deja Thoris had promised her hand to Sab Than filled him with dismay. "It cannot be," he exclaimed. "It is impossible. No man in all Helium would prefer death to the selling of our loved princess to the ruling house of Zodanga. She must have lost her mind to have assented to such an atrocious bargain. You, who do not know how we of Helium love the members of our ruling house, cannot appreciate the horror with which I contemplate such an unholy alliance, so he's willing to kill him. Got it. What can be done, John Carter?" he continued. "You are a resourceful man. Can you not think of some way to save Helium from this disgrace? Sure, everyone dies. That's the other solution." "Well, I got good news for you. Yeah, no kidding. If I can come within sword's reach of Sab Than," I answered, "I can solve the difficulty insofar as Helium is concerned, but for personal reasons, I would prefer that another struck the blow that frees Deja Thoris." Kantos Kan eyed me narrowly before he spoke. "You love her," he said. "Does she know it?" "She knows it, Kantos Kan, and repulses me only because she is promised to Sab Than." The splendid fellow sprang to his feet and, grasping me by the shoulders, raised his sword on high, exclaiming, "And had the choice been left to me, I could not have chosen a more fitting mate for the first princess of Barsoom." God, he's very popular. "Here is my hand upon your shoulder, John Carter, and my word that Sab Than shall go out at the very point of my sword for the sake of my love for Helium, for Deja Thoris, and for you. This very night I shall try to reach his quarters in the palace." "How?" I asked. "You are strongly guarded, and a quadruple force patrols the sky." He bent his head and thought a moment, and raised it with an air of confidence. "I only need to pass these guards, and I can do it," he said at last. I know a secret entrance to the palace through the pinnacle of the highest tower. It's not very secret, is it? You've been here for a short period of time, and you already know all the secret entrances to the towers. That's pretty impressive. I fell upon it by chance one day as I was passing above the palace on patrol duty. In this work, it is required that we investigate any unusual occurrence we may witness, and a face peering from the pinnacle of the high tower of the palace was to me most unusual. I therefore drew near and discovered that the possessor of the peering face was none other than Sabthan. He was slightly put out at being detected and commanded me to keep the matter to myself, explaining that the passage from the lower led directly to his apartments and was known only to him. You see what I mean by coincidences? I just happen to know how I'm going to kill the prince of the enemy, and I don't know why I haven't done it yet. If I can reach the roof of the barracks and get my machine, I can be at Sabthan's quarters in 5 minutes. But how am I to escape from this building, guarded as you say it is? Well, how are the machine sheds in the barracks guarded? I asked. There is usually but one man on duty there at night upon the roof. Go to the roof of this building, Kantos-kan, and wait me there. Without stopping to explain my plans, which you should do because you're allies, I retraced my way to the street and hastened to the barracks. I did not dare to enter the building, filled as it was with members of the Air Scout Squadron who, in common with all Zodanga, were on the lookout for me. The building was an enormous one, rearing its lofty head fully 1,000 feet into the air. And a rule occurs to me. You remember the title of the chapter, right? Lost in the Sky. And we were just fully explained, maybe not to the poor Zodangan, but, to Kantos-kan, but the reader was just told what the plans were, so they are going to fail. But then we would know, the plan would fail, yeah. Yeah, I think we do know what the plan is, so it is going to fail. This is my estimation. That's why we're going to get lost in the sky. But, the building was an enormous one, rearing its lofty head fully 1,000 feet into the air. But few buildings in Zodanga were higher than these barracks. Though several topped it by a few hundred feet, the docks of the great battleships of the line standing some 1,500 feet from the ground, while the freight and passenger stations of the merchant squadrons rose nearly as high. It was a long climb up the face of the building, and one fraught with much danger, but there was no other way, and so I essayed the task. The fact that Barsumium architecture is extremely ornate made the feat much simpler than I had anticipated, since I found ornamental ledges and projections which fairly formed a perfect ladder for me all the way to the eaves of the building. Here I met my first real obstacle. The eaves projected nearly 20 feet from the wall to which I clung, and though I encircled the great building, I could find no opening through them. That's making my feet tingle. Ugh. The top floor was alight, and filled with soldiers engaged in the pastimes of their kind. I could not therefore reach the floor through the building. There was one slight, desperate chance, and that I decided I must take it. It was for Deja Thors, and no man has lived who would not risk 1,000 deaths for such as she. Clinging to the wall with my feet in one hand, I unloosened one of the long leather straps of my trappings, at the end of which dangled a great hook by which air sailors are hung to the sides and bottoms of their craft for various purposes of repair, and by means of which landing parties are lowered to the ground from the battleships. I swung this hook cautiously to the roof several times before it finally found lodgment. Gently, I pulled on it to strengthen its hold, but whether it would bear the weight of my body, I did not know. It might be barely caught upon the very outer verge of the roof. So as my body, I didn't know. It might be barely caught upon the very outer verge of the roof, so that as my body swung out at the end of the strap, it would slip off, and launched me to the pavement 1,000 feet below. We have ads. We're going to pause there, and we will find out how successful or disastrous this plan will be. If the book ends here, or if John Carter somehow succeeds after these ads. And we are back. Welcome back from the advertisements. Yes. Where are we? Oh yes, John Carter was about to play an acrobatic circus routine with no safety net. An instant I hesitated, and then, releasing my grasp upon the supporting ornament, I swung out into space at the very end of the strap. Far below me lay the brilliantly lighted streets, the hard pavements, and death. There was a little jerk at the top of the supporting eaves, and a nasty, slipping, grating sound which turned me cold with apprehension, and the hook caught, and I was safe. And it probably needs a change of pants at that point. Oh wait, they don't wear pants. Never mind. Just gonna be a nasty splot up on the ground in a few moments. Clambering quickly aloft, I grasped the edge of the eaves and drew myself to the surface of the roof above. As I gained my feet, I was confronted by the sentry on duty, into the muzzle of whose revolver I found myself looking. "Who are you, and whence you come? Oh, and whence came you?" he cried. "I am an air scout, friend, and very near a dead one, for just by the merest of chance I escaped falling to the avenue below," I replied. "But how came you upon the roof, man? No one has landed or come up from the building for the past hour. Quick, explain yourself, or I call the guard." "Look you here, sentry, and you shall see how I came, and how close a shave I had to not coming at all," I answered, turning toward the edge of the roof, where, 20 feet below, at the end of my strap hung all my weapons. The fellow, acting on impulse of curiosity, stepped to my side and to his undoing, for as he leaned to peer over the eaves, I grasped him by his throat and his pistol arm and threw him heavily to the roof. I was wondering if he was going to do that, or throw him over the edge, but that would probably draw too much attention. The weapon dropped from his grasp, and my fingers choked off his attempted cry for assistance. Ouch. I gagged him, bound him, and then hung him over the edge of the roof as I myself had hung a few moments before. Oh, that's evil. I knew it would be morning before he would be discovered, and I needed all the time that I could gain. You're going to let him dangle 1,000 feet over the ground until morning? You're fucking evil. That is just do the classic bap him on the back of the head and knock him out cold, like Jesus. Donning my trappings and weapons, I hastened to the sheds, and soon had out both my machine and Kanto's cannons. Making his fast behind mine, I started my engine, and skimming over the edge of the roof, I dove down into the streets of the city, far below the plain usually occupied by the air patrol. In less than a minute, I was settling safely upon the roof of our apartment beside the astonished Kanto's can. I lost no time in explanation, but plunged immediately into a discussion of our plans for the immediate future. It was decided that I was to try to make helium, while Kanto's can was to enter the palace and dispatch Sabthan. If successful, he was then to follow me. He set my compass for me, a clever little device which will remain steadfastly fixed upon any given point on the surface of Barsoom. And bidding each other farewell, we rose together and sped in the direction of the palace, which lay in the route which I must take to reach helium. As we neared the high tower, a patrol shot down from above, throwing its piercing searchlight full upon my craft, and a voice roared out a command to halt. following with a shot as I paid no attention to his hail. Kanto's can dropped quickly into the darkness, while I rose steadily and at terrific speed raced through the Martian sky, followed by a dozen of the Air Scout craft which had joined the pursuit. And later, by a swift cruiser carrying 100 men and a battery of rapid-fire guns. Oh, Jesus. By twisting and turning my little machine, now rising and falling, now rising and now falling, I managed to elude their searchlights most of the time. But I was also losing ground by these tactics, and so I decided to hazard everything on a straightaway course and leave the result to fate and the speed of my machine. Kanto's can had shown me a trick of gearing, which is known only to the Navy of Helium, that greatly increased the speed of our machines, so that I felt sure I could outdistance my pursuers, perhaps, if I could dodge their projectiles for a few moments. As I sped through the air, the screeching of the bullets around me convinced me that only by a miracle could I escape. But the die was cast, and throwing on full speed, I raced a straight course toward Helium. Gradually, I left my pursuers further and further behind, and I was just congratulating myself on my lucky escape when a well-directed shot from the cruiser exploded at the prow of my little craft. The concussion nearly capsized her, and with a sickening plunge she hurtled downward through the dark night. How far I fell before I regained control of the plane, I do not know. You could probably just look at the ground for that. But I must have been very close to the ground when I started to rise again, as I plainly heard the squealing of animals below me. Rising again, I scanned the heavens for my pursuers, and finally, making out their lights far behind me, saw that they were landing, evidently in search of me. Not until their lights were no longer discernible did I venture to flash my little lamp upon my compass, and then I found, to my consternation, that a fragment of the projectile had utterly destroyed my only guide, as well as my speedometer. It was true, I could follow the stars in the general direction of Helium, but without knowing the exact location of the city or the speed at which I was traveling, my chances for finding it were slim. Actually, they're not. Yeah. Helium lies 1,000 miles southwest of Sodanga, and with my compass intact, I should have made the trip, barring accidents, in between 4 and 5 hours. That is a fast flying machine. Holy crap. I'm not going to do this with my brain. Let's say 5 hours. That's 200 miles an hour. And what is it like? What is miles to kilometers? Get this in real speed. Miles to, that's meals. Miles to kilometers. Okay, we're just going to put like 200. Yeah, it's 1.6, which, yeah, does ring a bell. That's 321.9 kilometers an hour. 22 kilometers an hour, basically. That's fast. That's like half the speed of like of an airliner, or some of the fastest speeds you get in cars. What is the sound barrier? That's a good question. What is the size? Like I think that's around 700. What is the sound barrier? Sound barrier. Yeah, the sound barrier. I think that's what it is. How fast do you have to go to break the sound barrier? Okay, the speed of sound. Let's just put in the speed of sound. Speed of sound, right? Speed of sound. Just tell me what it is. Like, literally, just tell me what it is. Okay, no, that's a movie. That's not what I want. Wikipedia will help us. It is apparently 1,235 kilometers an hour. So this is like around about a quarter of the speed of sound. He would have to travel a quarter of the speed of sound to make that distance in that time. That's a fast flying machine. As it turned out, however, Morning found me speeding over a vast expanse of dead sea bottom after nearly 6 hours of continuous flight at high speed. Presently, a great city showed below me, but it was not Helium. As that alone of all Barsoomian metropolises consists of 2 immense circular walled cities about 75 miles apart, and would have been easily distinguishable from the altitude at which I was flying. Believing that I had come too far to the north and west, I turned back in a southeasterly direction, passing during the forenoon several other large cities, but none resembling the description which Kantos Kan had given me of Helium. In addition to the twin city formation of Helium, another distinguishing feature is the 2 immense towers, one of vivid scarlet rising nearly a mile into the air from the center of one of the cities, while the other, of bright yellow and of the same height, marks her sister. Chapter 24. Tars Tarkas finds a friend. Oh, we revisit a green man. This is Sula or Soja. This is her father, the man who found John. Actually, yeah. Helium, a double city like the 2 protons. That's a good call. Yeah, it's a good catch, Valena. It's yeah, because it's science-y. About noon, I passed low over a great dead city of ancient Mars, and as I skimmed out across the plain beyond, I came full upon several thousand green warriors engaged in a terrific battle. Scarcely had I seen them than a volley of shots was directed at me, and with the almost unfailing accuracy of their aim, my little craft was instantly a ruined wreck, sinking erratically to the ground. No, don't do that. I fell almost directly in the center of the fierce combat, among warriors who had not seen my approach, so busily were they engaged in life and death struggles. The men were fighting on foot with longswords, while an occasional shot from a sharpshooter on the outskirts of the conflict would bring down a warrior who might for an instant separate himself from the entangled mass. I don't know why they would just shoot into the mass. As my machine sank among them, I realized that it was fight or die, with good chances of dying in any event, and so I struck the ground with a drawn longsword, ready to defend myself as I could. I fell beside a huge monster who was engaged with 3 antagonists, and as I glanced at his fierce face filled with the light of battle, I recognized Tars Tarkas the Thark. He did not see me, as I was a trifle behind him, and just then the 3 warriors opposing him, and whom I recognized as Warhoons, charged simultaneously. The mighty fellow made quick work of one of them, but in stepping back for another thrust, he fell over a dead body behind him and was down, and at the mercy of his foes in an instant. Quick as lightning they were upon him, and Tars Tarkas would have been gathered to his father's, in short order, had I not sprung before his prostrate form and engaged his adversaries. I will never get that right the first time. I had accounted for one of them when the mighty Thark regained his feet and quickly settled the other. He gave me one look, and a slight smile touched his grim lip as, touching my shoulder, he said, "I would scarcely recognize you, John Carter, but there is no other mortal upon Barsoom who would have done what you have for me. I think I have learned that there is such a thing as friendship, my friend." Or saying you're friends. That could be good for you too. He said no more, nor was there opportunity, for the Warhoons were closing in about us, and together we fought shoulder to shoulder during all that long, hot afternoon, until the tide of battle turned and the remnant of the fierce Warhoon horde fell back upon their throats and fled into the gathering darkness. 10,000 men had been engaged in that titanic struggle, and upon the field of battle lay 3,000 dead. Neither side asked nor gave quarter, nor did they attempt to take prisoners. That's what that is. We recently learned that in American politics. On our return to the city after the battle, we had gone directly to Tarkas's quarters, where I was left alone while the chieftain attended the customary council which immediately follows an engagement. As I sat, awaiting the return of the Green Warrior, I heard something move in an adjoining apartment, and as I glanced up, there rushed suddenly upon me a huge and hideous creature, which bore me backward upon the pile of silks and furs upon which I had been reclining. It was Woola. Faithful, loving Woola. He had found his way back to Thark and, as Tarkas later told me, had gone immediately to my former quarters where he had taken up his pathetic and seemingly hopeless watch for my return. Aw. You want to reward that kind of behavior, I think. Tal Hajjas knows that you are here, John Carter, said Tarkas on his return from the Jedak's quarters. Sarkoja saw and recognized you as we were returning. Tal Hajjas has ordered me to bring you before him tonight. I have 10 thoats, John Carter. You may take your choice from among them, and I will accompany you to the nearest waterway that leads to Helium. Tarkas may be a cruel green warrior, but he can be a friend as well. Come, we must start. And when you return, Tarkas? I asked. The wild Kalats possibly, or worse, he replied. Unless I should chance to have the opportunity I have so long waited of battling with Tal Hajjas. We will stay, Tarkas, and see Tal Hajjas tonight. You shall not sacrifice yourself, and it may be that tonight you can have the chance you wait. He objected strenuously. He also doesn't know that you know that he's waiting for that opportunity, by the way, just FYI. He objected strenuously, saying that Tal Hajjas often flew into wild fits of passion at the mere thought of the blow I had dealt him, and that if he ever laid his hands upon me, I would be subjected to the most horrible tortures. While we were eating, I repeated to Tarkas the story which Sola had told me that night upon the sea bottom during the march to Thark. He said but little, but the great muscles of his face worked in passion and in agony at recollection of the horrors which had been heaped upon the only thing he had ever loved in all his cold, cruel, terrible existence. He no longer demurred when I suggested that we go before Tal Hajjas, only saying that he would like to speak to Sarkoja first. At his request, I accompanied him to her quarters, and the look of venomous hatred she cast upon me was almost adequate recompense for any future misfortunes this accidental return to Thark might bring me. Sarjoka, said Tarkas, 40 years ago you were instrumental in bringing about the torture and death of a woman named Gozava. I have just discovered that the warrior who loved that woman has learned of your part in the transaction. He may not kill you, Sarjoka. It is not our custom. But there is nothing to prevent him tying one end of a strap about your neck and the other end to a wild thoat, merely to test your fitness to survive and help perpetuate our race. Having heard that he would do this on the morrow, I thought it only right to warn you, for I am a just man. The river is but a short pilgrimage, Sarkoja. Come, John Carter. The next morning, Sarjoka was gone, nor was she ever seen after. Convincing. I can't kill you with a sword, but I can torture you to death because it's just a test. Interesting. In silence, we hastened to the Jedak's palace, where we were immediately admitted to his presence. In fact, he could scarcely wait to see me and was standing erect upon his platform, glowering at the entrance as I came in. Strap him to that pillar, he shrieked. We shall see who it is dares strike the mighty Tal Hajjas, heat the irons. With my own hands I shall burn the eyes from his head, that he may not pollute my person with his vile gaze. Chieftains of Thark, I cried, turning to the assembled council and ignoring Tal Hajjas. I have been a chief among you, and today I have fought for Thark shoulder to shoulder with her greatest warrior. You owe me, at least, a hearing. I have won that much today. You claim to be a just people. Silence! Roared Tal Hajas. Gag the creature and bind him as I command. Justice, Tal Hajas, exclaimed Lorquas-Potamel. Who are you to set aside the customs of ages among the Tharks? Yes, justice, echoed a dozen voices, and so, while Tal Hajas fumed and frothed, I continued. You are a brave people, and you love bravery. But where was your mighty Jeddak during the fighting today? I did not see him in the thick of battle. He was not there. He rends defenseless women and little children in his lair, but how recently has one of you seen him fight with men? Why, even I, a midget beside him, felled him with a single blow of my fist. Is it of such that the Tharks fashioned their Jeddaks? There stands beside me now a great Thark, a mighty warrior and a noble man. Chieftains, how sounds Tarkas, Jeddak of Thark? A roar of deep-toned applause greeted this suggestion. But it remains for this council to command, and Tal Hajas must prove his fitness to rule. Were he a brave man, he would invite Tarkas to combat, for he does not love him. But Tal Hajas is afraid. Tal Hajas, your Jeddak, is a coward. With my bare hands I could kill him, and he knows it. After I ceased, there was tense silence. As all eyes were riveted upon Tal Hajas, he did not speak or move, but the blotchy green of his countenance turned livid, and the froth froze upon his lips. Tal Hajas, said Lorquas-Potamel in a cold, hard voice. Never in my long life have I seen a Jeddak of Tharks so humiliated. There could be but one answer to this arraignment. We waited. And still, Tal Hajas stood as though petrified. Chieftains, continued Lorquas-Potamel, shall the Jeddak Tal Hajas prove his fitness to rule over Tarkas? We were 20 chieftains about the rostrum, and 20 swords flashed high in assent. There was no alternative. That decree was final, and so Tal Hajas drew his long sword and advanced to meet Tarkas. The combat was soon over, and with his foot upon the neck of the dead monster, Tarkas became Jeddak among the Tharks. His first act was to make me a full-fledged chieftain with the rank I had won by my combats the first few weeks of my captivity among them. Seeing the favorable disposition of the warriors toward Tarkas as well as toward me, I grasped the opportunity to enlist them in my cause against Zodanga. I told Tarkas the story of my adventures, and in a few words had explained to him the thought I had in mind. John Carter has made a proposal, he said, addressing the council, which meets with my sanction. I shall put it to you briefly. Deja Thoris, the princess of Helium, who was our prisoner, is now held by the Jeddak of Zodanga, whose son she must wed to save her country from devastation at the hands of the Zodangan forces. John Carter suggests that we rescue her and return her to Helium. The loot of Zodanga would be magnificent, and I have often thought that had we an alliance with the people of Helium, we could obtain sufficient assurance of sustenance to permit us to increase the size and frequency of our hatchings, and thus become unquestionably supreme among the green men of all Barsoom. What say you? It was a chance to fight, an opportunity to loot, and they rose to the bait as a speckled trout to a fly. For Tharks, they were wildly enthusiastic, and before another half hour had passed, 20 mounted messengers were speeding across the Dead Sea bottoms. Across Dead Sea, not the Dead Sea. Across Dead Sea bottoms to call the hordes together for the expedition. In 3 days, we were on the march towards Zodanga. 100,000 strong, as Tars Tarkas had been able to enlist the services of 3 smaller hordes on the promise of the great loot of Zodanga. At the head of the column, I rode beside the great Thark, while at the heels of my mount trotted my beloved Woola. We traveled entirely by night, timing our marches so that we camped during the day at deserted cities where, even to the beasts, we were all kept indoors during the daylight hours. 100,000 strong with the logistics train? Those are big-ass dead cities. On the march, Tars Tarkas, through his remarkable ability and statesmanship, enlisted 50,000 more warriors from various hordes, so that, 10 days after we set out, we halted at midnight outside the great walled city of Zodanga, 150,000 strong. The fighting strength and efficiency of this horde of ferocious green monsters was equivalent to 10 times their number of red men. Never in the history of Barsoom, Tars Tarkas told me, has such a force of green warriors marched to battle together. It was a monstrous task to keep even a semblance of harmony among them, and it was a marvel to me that he got them to the city without a mighty battle among themselves. It requires a great feat of a disbelief on our part. But as we neared Zodanga, their personal quarrels were submerged by their greater hatred for the Red Men, and especially for the Zodangans, who had for years waged a ruthless campaign of extermination against the Green Men, directing special attention toward despoiling their incubators. Now that we were before Zodanga, the task of obtaining entry to the city devolved upon me, and directing Tars Tarkas to hold his forces in 2 divisions out of earshot of the city, with each division opposite a large gateway. I took 20 dismounted warriors and approached one of the small gates that pierced the walls at short intervals. These gates have no regular guard, but are covered by sentries who patrol the avenue that encircles the city just within the walls, as our metropolitan police patrols their beats. The walls of Zodanga are 75 feet in height and 50 feet thick. They are built of enormous blocks of carborundum. Fantasy carbon? Carborundum. And the task of entering the city seemed to my escort of green warriors an impossibility. The fellows who had been detailed to accompany me were of one of the smaller hordes and therefore did not know me. Placing 3 of them with their faces to the wall and arms locked, I commanded 2 more to mount their shoulders, and a 6th I ordered to climb upon the shoulders of the upper 2. The head of the topmost warrior towered over 40 feet from the ground. In this way, with 10 warriors, I built a series of 3 steps from the ground to the shoulders of the topmost man. Then, starting from a short distance behind them, I ran swiftly up from one tier to the next, and with a final bound from the broad shoulders of the highest, I clutched the top of the great wall and quietly drew myself to its broad expanse. After me, I dragged 6 lengths of leather from an equal number of my warriors. These lengths we had previously fastened together, and passing one end to the topmost warrior, I lowered the other end cautiously over the opposite side of the wall toward the avenue below. No one was in sight, so lowering myself to the end of my leather strap, I dropped the remaining 30 feet to the pavement below. I had learned from Kanto's Khan the secret of opening these gates, and in another moment my 20 great fighting men stood within the doomed city of Zodanga. I'm glad we learned the secret of opening these gates, just kind of like, I kind of just wave that off to the side. I found to my delight that I had entered at the lower boundary of the enormous palace grounds. The building itself showed in the distance a blaze of glorious light, and on the instant I determined to lead a detachment of warriors directly within the palace itself, while the balance of the great horde was attacking the barracks of the soldiery. The solidary. I suppose it's like soldiery. It's like soldiery. No, my brain does not like this word. Soldiery. I know this is a real word, and I know I should probably know this word. But sometimes reading a word just does not go well with your brain. Yes, watch on YouTube. This is why I'm here. Any day now. Soldiery. It's soldiery. There should be a G in there. My brain's like, where is the G? Soldiery. The I should just be a G. The next time I come across this, I'll be like, hey, Sid, the I is a G. Soldiery. And I know I've heard that word 100 times before. It's fine. Don't worry about it. Dispatching one of my men to Tars Tarkas for a detail of 50 Tharks. With a word of my intentions, I ordered 10 warriors to capture and open one of the great gates, while with the 9 remaining, I took the other. We were to do our work quietly. No shots were to be fired, and no general advance made until I had reached the palace with my 50 Tharks. Our plans worked to perfection. The 2 sentries we met were dispatched to their fathers upon the banks of the lost sea of Chorus, and the guards at both gates followed them in silence. Chapter 25. The Looting of Zodanga. I wonder if the battle will go well. As the great gate where I stood swung open, my 50 Tharks, headed by Tars Tarkas himself, rode in upon their mighty thoats. I led them to the palace walls, which I negotiated easily without assistance. Once inside, however, the gate gave me considerable trouble. I finally was rewarded by seeing it swing upon its huge hinges, and soon my fierce escort was riding across the gardens of the Jadak of Zodanga. I hope they don't ruin the gardens. Maybe chew on them a little bit. As we approached the palace, I could see through the great windows of the first floor into the brilliantly illuminated audience chamber of Than Kosis. The immense hall was crowded with nobles and their women, as though some important function was in progress. There was not a guard in sight without the palace, due, I presume, to the fact that the city and palace walls were considered impregnable. And so I came close and peered within. At one end of the chamber, upon massive golden thrones encrusted with diamonds, sat Than Kosis and his consort, surrounded by officers and dignitaries of state. Before them stretched a broad aisle lined on either side with soldiery, and as I looked, there entered this aisle at the far end of the hall the head of a procession which advanced to the foot of the throne. The wedding, perhaps? First, there marched 4 officers of the Jedak's guard bearing a huge slaver on which reposed upon a cushion of scarlet silk a great golden chain with a collar and padlock at each end. Directly behind these officers came 4 others carrying a similar slaver, upon supported the magnificent ornaments of a prince and princess of the reigning house of Zodanga. At the foot of the throne, these 2 parties separated and halted, facing each other at opposite sides of the aisle. Then came more dignitaries, and the officers of the palace and of the army, and finally 2 figures entirely muffled in scarlet silk, so that not a feature of either was discernible. These 2 stopped at the foot of the throne, facing Than Kosis. When the balance of the procession had entered and assumed their stations, Than Kosis addressed the couple standing before him. I could not hear his words, but presently 2 officers advanced and removed the scarlet robe from one of the figures, and I saw that Kantos Khan had failed in his mission. For it was Sab Than, Prince of Zodanga, who stood revealed before me. Well, yeah, you kind of left Kando's camp behind. You kind of do that a lot. Thad Kosis now took a set of the ornaments from one of the slavers and placed one of the collars of gold about his son's neck, springing the padlock fast. After a few more words addressed to Sabthan, he turned to the other figure from which the officers now removed the enshrouded silks, disclosing to my now comprehending view Deja Thoris, Princess of Helium. The object of the ceremony was clear to me. In another moment, Deja Thoris will be joined forever to the Prince of Zodanga. Well, I mean, you already kind of understood that was already happened. That had already happened. This is just a formality. It was an impressive and beautiful ceremony, I presume, but to me it seemed the most fiendish sight I had ever witnessed. And as the ornaments were adjusted upon her beautiful figure and her collar of gold swung open in the hands of Thankosis, I raised my long sword above my head, and with the heavy hilt I shattered the glass of the great window and sprang into the midst of the astonished assemblage. With a bound, I was on the steps of the platform beside Thankosis, and as he stood riveted with surprise, I brought my longsword down upon the golden chain that would have bound Deja Thoris to another. In an instant, all was confusion. 1,000 drawn swords menaced me from every quarter, and Sab Than sprang upon me with a jeweled dagger he had drawn from his nuptial ornaments. I could have killed him as easily as I might a fly, but the age-old custom of Barsoom stayed my hand, and grasping his wrist as the dagger flew toward my heart, I held him as though in a vice, and with my longsword pointed to the far end of the hall. "Zodanga has fallen," I cried. "Look!" All eyes turned in the direction I had indicated, and there, forging through the portals of the entranceway, rode Tars Tarkas and his 50 warriors on their great thoats. The doors are bigger than I thought they were. Like, holy cow. Those are like the large versions, right? The super large, quote-unquote, horses. A cry of alarm and amazement broke from the assemblage, but no word of fear. And in a moment the soldiers and nobles of Zodanga were hurling themselves upon the advancing Tharks, thrusting Sab Than headlong from the platform. I drew Deja Thoris to my side. Behind the throne was a narrow doorway, and in this Thankosis now stood facing me, with a drawn longsword. In an instant we were engaged, and I found no mean antagonist. As we circled upon the broad platform, I saw Sab Than rushing up the steps to aid his father, but as he raised his hand to strike, Deja Thoris sprang before him, and then, upon my sword, found the spot that made Sab Than Jeddak of Zodanga. Sorry, what? Deja Thoris sprang before him, and then my sword found the spot that made Sab Than Jeddak. Oh, that's so roundabout. He killed Dad. They made Jeddak Zodanga. They made Sab Than Jeddak of Zodanga. As his father rolled dead upon the floor, the new Jeddak tore himself free from Deja Thoris's grasp, and again we faced each other. He was soon joined by a quartet of officers, and with my back against the golden throne, I fought once again for Deja Thoris. I was hard-pressed to defend myself and yet not strike down Sab Than, and, with him, my last chance to win the woman I loved. My blade was swinging with the rapidity of lightning as I sought to parry the thrusts and cuts of my opponents. 2 I had disarmed, and 1 was down, when several more rushed to the aid of their new ruler and to avenge the death of the old. I had to scroll past the picture. As they advanced, there were cries of, "The woman! The woman! Strike her down! It is her plot! Kill her! Kill her!" Calling to Deja Thoris to get behind me, I worked my way toward the little doorway, back of the throne. But the officers realized my intentions, and 3 of them sprang in behind me and blocked my chances for gaining a position where I could have defended Deja Thoris against an army of swordsmen. The Tharks were having their hands full in the center of the room, and I began to realize that nothing short of a miracle could save Deja Thoris and myself. When I saw Tars Tarkas surging through the crowds of pygmies and swarmed about him, that swarmed about him. With one swing of his mighty longsword, he laid a dozen corpses at his feet. And so he hewed a pathway before him until, in another moment, he stood upon the platform beside me, dealing death and destruction right and left. The bravery of the Zodangans was awe-inspiring. Not one attempted to escape, and when the fighting ceased, it was because only Tharks remained alive in the great hall, other than Deja Thors and myself. Sab Than lay dead beside his father, and the corpse of the flower of Zodangan nobility and chivalry covered the floor of the bloody shambles. My first thought, when the battle was over, was for Kantos Khan, and leaving Deja Thors in charge of Thars Tarkas, I took a dozen warriors and hastened to the dungeons beneath the palace. The jailers had all left to join the fighters in the throne room, so we searched the labyrinthine prison without opposition. I called Kantos Khan's name aloud in each new corridor and compartment, and finally I was rewarded by hearing a faint response. Guided by the sound, we soon found him helpless in a dark recess. He was overjoyed at seeing me, and to know the meaning of the fight, faint echoes of which had reached his prison cell. He told me that the air patrol had captured him before he reached the high tower of the palace, so that he had not even seen Sab Than. We discovered that it would be futile to attempt to cut away the bars and chains which held him prisoner, so at his suggestion I returned to search the bodies on the floor above for keys to open the padlocks for his cell and of his chains. I mean, if they're padlocks, you can just bash those away. Fortunately, among the first I examined, I found his jailer, because actually playing that out too much longer would just be a waste of space, and soon we had Kantos Khan with us in the throne room. The sounds of heavy firing, mingled with shouts and cries, came to us from the city's streets, and Thars Tarkas hastened away to direct the fighting without. Kantos Khan accompanied him to act as guide, and the green warriors, commencing a thorough search of the palace for other Zodangans and for loot, and Deja Thors and I were left alone. She had sunk into one of the golden thrones, and as I turned to her, she greeted me with a wan smile. "Was there ever such a man?" she exclaimed. "I know that Barsoom has never before seen your like. Can it be that all Earthmen are as you?" Yeah, actually it is. We're all like that. We're all Chads. "Alone, a stranger, hunted, threatened, persecuted. You have done in a few short months what in all the past ages of Barsoom no man has ever done. Joined together the wild hordes of the sea bottoms and brought them to fight as allies of a red Martian people. Well, none of them could jump 100 feet, right? Don't be so harsh on yourself." "The answer is easy, Deja Thors," I replied, smiling. "It was not I who did it. It was love. Love for Deja Thors, which obviously no other person could possibly have. A power that would work greater miracles than this you have seen." A pretty flush overspread her face, and she answered, "You may say that now, John Carter, and I may listen, for I am free." "And more still I have to say, ere it is again too late," I returned. "I have done many strange things in my life, many things that wiser men would not have dared. But never in my wildest fancies have I dreamed of winning a Deja Thors for myself. For never had I dreamed that in all the universe dwelt such a woman as the Princess of Helium. That you are a princess does not abash me, but that you are you is enough to make me doubt my sanity, as I ask you, my princess, to be mine." "He does not need to be abashed, who so well knew the answer to his plea before the plea were made," she replied, rising and placing her dear hands upon my shoulders. And so I took her in my arms and kissed her. And thus, in the midst of a city of wild conflict, filled with the alarms of war, with death and destruction reaping their terrible harvest around her, did Deja Thors, Princess of Helium, shrew daughter of Mars, the god of war, promise herself in marriage to John Carter, gentleman of Virginia. What a romantic conclusion to that chapter in the midst of a city being ransacked, a defenseless city being ransacked by 150,000 giant lizardmen, butchering mostly civilians, which I think we would argue is largely like they're considered innocent anyways. There'd be some war crimes going on here. Oh, this is a hell of a name. Chapter 26, Through Carnage to Joy. Some time later, Tars Tarkas and Kantos Kan returned to report that Zodanga had been completely reduced. Her forces were entirely destroyed or captured, and no further resistance was to be expected from within. Several battleships had escaped, but there were thousands of war and merchant vessels under guard of Thark warriors. The lesser hordes had commenced looting and quarreling among themselves, so it was decided that we collect what warriors we could, man as many vessels as possible with Zodangan prisoners, and make for Helium without further loss of time. 5 hours later, we sailed from the roofs of the dock buildings with a fleet of 250 battleships, carrying nearly 100,000 green warriors. Followed by a fleet of transports with our thoats. Gotta bring the dogs and the horses. Behind us, we left the stricken city in the fierce and brutal clutches of some 40,000 green warriors of the lesser hordes. They were looting, murdering, and fighting amongst themselves. In 100 places they had applied the torch, and columns of dense smoke were rising above the city as though to blot out from the eye of heaven the horrid sights beneath. Okay, so they really are just war crimes. All the war crimes. In the middle of the afternoon, we sighted the scarlet and yellow towers of Helium. And a short time later, a great fleet of Zodangan battleships rose from the camps of the besiegers without the city and advanced to meet us. The banners of Helium had been strung from stem to stern of each of our mighty craft, but the Zodangans did not need this sign to realize that we were enemies, for our green Martian warriors had opened fire upon them almost as they left the ground. With their uncanny marksmanship, they raked the oncoming fleet with volley after volley. The twin cities of Helium, perceiving that we were friends, sent out hundreds of vessels to aid us, and then began the first real air battle I had ever witnessed. The vessels carrying our green warriors were kept circling above the contending fleets of Helium and Zodanga, since their batteries were useless in the hands of the Tharks who, having no skill in naval gunnery. Their small arm fire, however, was most effective, and the final outcome of the engagement was strongly influenced, if not wholly determined, by their presence. Well, yeah, their small arms are like little explosion shooters. Yes, that's right, explosion shooters. At first, the two forces circled at the same altitude, pouring broadside after broadside into each other. Presently, a great hole was torn in the hull of one of the immense battlecraft from the Zodangan camp. With a lurch, she turned completely over, the little figures of her crew plunging, turning and twisting toward the ground 1,000 feet below. Then, with sickening velocity, she tore after them, almost completely burying herself in the soft loam of the ancient sea bottom. A wild cry of exultation arose from the Heliumite squadron, and with redoubled ferocity they fell upon the Zodangan fleet. By a pretty maneuver, two of the vessels of Helium gained a position above their adversaries, from which they poured upon them from their keel bomb batteries a perfect torrent of exploding bombs. Then, one by one, the battleships of Helium succeeded in rising above the Zodangans, and in a short time a number of the beleaguering battleships were drifting hopeless wrecks toward the high scarlet tower of Greater Helium. Several others attempted to escape. They were soon surrounded by thousands of tiny individual flyers, and above each hung amongst her battleship of Helium, ready to drop boarding parties upon their decks. Within but little more than an hour from the moment the victorious Zodangan squadron had risen to meet us from the camp of the besiegers, the battle was over, and the remaining vessels of the conquered Zodangans were headed toward the cities of Helium under prize crews. There was an extremely pathetic side to the surrender of these mighty flyers, the result of an age-old custom which demanded that surrender should be signalized by the voluntary plunging to earth of the commander of the vanquished vessel. That's brutal. So basically, you have to mutiny to surrender. One after another, the brave fellows, holding their colors high above their heads, leaped from the towering bows of their mighty craft to an awful death. Not until the commander of the entire fleet took the fearful plunge, thus indicating the surrender of the remaining vessels, did the fighting cease, and the useless sacrifice of brave men come to an end. We now signaled the flagship of Helium's navy to approach, and when she was within hailing distance, I called out that we had the Princess Deja Thors on board, and that we wished to transfer her to the flagship that she might be taken immediately to the city. As the full import of my announcement bore in upon them, a great cry arose from the decks of the flagship, and a moment later the colors of the Princess of Helium broke from 100 points upon her upper works. When the other vessels of the squadron caught the meaning of the signals flashed to them, they looked up the wild acclaim and unfurled her colors in the gleaming sunlight. The flagship bore down upon us, and as she swung gracefully to and touched our side, a dozen officers sprang upon our decks. Their astonished gaze fell upon the hundreds of green warriors who now came forth from the fighting shelters. They stopped aghast, but at the sight of Kantos Khan, who advanced to meet them, they came forward, crowding about him. Deja Thors and I then advanced, and they had no eyes for other than her. Yeah, she has that effect on people, apparently. She received them gracefully, calling each by name, and they were men high in the esteem and service of her grandfather, and she knew them well. "Lay your hands upon the shoulder of John Carter," she said to them, turning toward me, "the man to whom Helium owes her princess as well as her victory today." They were very courteous to me, and said many kind and complimentary things, but what seemed to impress them most was that I had won the aid of the fierce Tharks in my campaign for the liberation of Deja Thors and the relief of Helium. "You owe your thanks more to another man than to me," I said, "and there he is. Meet one of the Barsoom's greatest soldiers and statesmen, Tars Tarkas, Jadak of Thark." With the same polished courtesy that had marked their manner toward me, they extended their greetings to the great Thark, nor, to my surprise, was he much behind in them in ease of bearing or in courtly speech. Though not garrulous race, the Tharks are extremely formal, and their ways lend themselves amazingly to dignified and courtly manners. Yeah, that's not true. Nope. That is a convenient lie you are using for the moment. That is utter bullshit. Deja Thors went abroad, the flagship, and was much put out that I would not follow, but, as I explained to her, the battle was but partly won. We still had the land forces of the besieging Zorangans to account for, and I would not leave Tars Tarkas until that had been accomplished. The commander of the naval forces of Helium promised to arrange to have the armies of Helium attack from the city in conjunction with our land attack, and so the vessels separated, and Deja Thors was borne in triumph back to the court of her grandfather, Tardas Mors Jadak of Helium. In the distance lay our fleet of transports, with the thoats of the green warriors where they had remained during the battle. Without landing stages, it was to be a difficult matter to unload these beasts upon the open plain, but there was nothing else for it. And so we put out for a point about 10 miles from the city and began the task. It was necessary to lower the animals to the ground in slings, and this work occupied the remainder of the day and half the night. Twice we were attacked by parties of Zodangan cavalry, but with little loss. however, and after darkness shut down, they withdrew. And after darkness shut down, they withdrew. Hit the commas in the wrong spot there. As soon as the last thoat was unloaded, Tarkas gave the command to advance. And in 3 parties we crept upon the Zodangan camp. How? How? They knew you were there. They attacked you several times. How could you creep upon them? They're obviously watching you directly. Anyways, they crept upon the Zodangan camp from the north, the south, and the east, and utterly surprised them. Ooh, how do we know you didn't see you? Yes. About a mile from the main camp, we encountered their outposts and, as had been prearranged, accepted this as the signal to charge. With wild, ferocious cries and amidst the nasty squealing of battle-enraged thoats, we bore down upon the Zodangans. We did not catch them napping, no, you wouldn't, but found a well-entrenched battle line confronting us, obviously. Time after time we were repulsed until, toward noon, I began to fear for the result of the battle. The Zodangans numbered nearly 1 million fighting men, gathered from pole. Why didn't you bomb them? You have bombs on those ships, gathered from pole to pole, wherever stretched the ribbon-like waterways, while pitted against them were less than 100,000 green warriors. The forces from Helium had not arrived, nor could we receive any word from them. Just at noon, we heard heavy firing all along the line between the Zodangans and the cities, and we knew then that our much-needed reinforcements had come. Again, Tarkas ordered the charge, and once more the mighty thoats bore their terrible riders against the ramparts of the enemy. At the same moment, the battle line of Helium surged over the opposite breastwork of the Zodangans, and in another moment, they are being crushed as between 2 millstones. Nobly they fought, but in vain. Just as it is in vain that we avoid ads, but here they are anyways. Alright, we're going to run ads, and we'll get back here to see the conclusion of the battle, probably. And the ads are done. Alright. You can see, the Zodangans at another moment they were being crushed as between 2 millstones. There we go. Yet nobly they fought, but in vain. The plain before the city became a veritable shambles ere the last Zodangan surrendered. But finally the carnage ceased. The prisoners were marched back to Helium and we entered the greater city's gates. A huge triumphal procession of conquering heroes. You mean savoring heroes? Heroes, because they're not conquering. Right? So. The broad avenues were lined with women and children, among which the few men whose duties necessitated that they remain within the city during the battle. We were greeted with an endless round of applause and showered with ornaments of gold, platinum, silver, and precious jewels. The city had gone mad with joy. Yeah, I'm sure a city under siege for so long is really so willing to part with any kind of currency that they might need to buy food and stuff with. Anyways, it's a joyous moment. Let us put such trivial things as not starving to death aside for the moment. My fierce Tharks caused the wildest excitement and enthusiasm. Never before had an armed body of green warriors entered the gates of Helium, and that they came now as friends and allies filled the red men with rejoicing. That's a nice dream. That my poor services to Deja Thoris had become known to the Heliumites was evidenced by the loud crying of my name and by the loads of ornaments that were fastened upon me and my huge thoat as we passed up the avenues to the palace. For even in the face of the ferocious appearance of Wula, the populace pressed close about me. Perfect opportunity for an assassin. As we approached this magnificent pile, we were met by a party of officers who greeted us warmly and requested that Tarkas and his Jeds, with the Jedaks and Jeds of his wild allies, together with myself, dismount and accompany them to receive from Tardos Mors an expression of his gratitude for our services. At the top of the great steps leading up into the main portals of the palace stood the royal party, and as we reached the lower steps, one of their number descended to meet us. He was an almost perfect specimen of manhood, tall, straight as an arrow, superbly muscled, and with the carriage and bearing of a ruler of men. I did not need to be told that he was Tardos Mors, Jeddak of Helium. Yes, because as we know, the more manly you look, the more obvious you are a leader. Yes. Probably naked, yeah, Valana, they're all naked. I mean, I guess that's important for you. More so for you. You can just imagine the perfect specimen of a man. Just so whatever that is. Maybe the Chad, the black and white Chad image. That's probably who he is. It's probably where that picture was taken on Mars, which is why it's black and white. The first member of our party he met was Tars Tarkas, and his first words sealed forever the new friendship between the races. That Tardos Mors, he said earnestly, may meet the greatest living warrior of Barsoom is a priceless honor, but that he may lay his hand on the shoulder of a friend and ally is a far greater boon. Jeddak of Helium, returned Tars Tarkas. It has remained for a man of another world to teach the green warriors of Barsoom the meaning of friendship. To him we owe the fact that the hordes of Thark can understand you, that they can appreciate and reciprocate the sentiments so graciously expressed. Tardos Mors then greeted each of the green Jeddaks and Jeds, and to each spoke words of friendship and appreciation. As he approached me, he laid both hands upon my shoulders. Welcome, my son, he said. That you are granted gladly and without one word of opposition the most precious jewel in all Helium, yes, on all Barsoom, is sufficient earnest of my esteem. Yes, my daughter is part of my jewelry collection. We were then presented to Mors Kajak, Jed of Lesser Helium, and father of Deja Thoris. He had followed close behind Tardos Mors and seemed even more affected by the meeting than had his father. He tried a dozen times to express his gratitude to me, but his voice choked with emotion, and he could not speak. And yet he had, as I was to later learn, a reputation for ferocity and fearlessness as a fighter that was remarkable even upon warlike Barsoom, proving just how powerfully emotional he was, because fearlessness, obviously, crying, what's that? He's too strong for that nonsense. In common with all Helium, he worshipped his daughter, nor could he think of what she had escaped without deep emotion. Chapter 27, From Joy to Death. For 10 days, the hordes of Thark and their wild allies were feasted and entertained, and then, loaded with costly presents and escorted by 10,000 soldiers of Helium, commanded by Mors Kajak, they started on the return journey to their own lands. The Jed of Lesser Helium, with a small party of nobles, accompanied them all the way to Thark to cement more closely the new bonds of peace and friendship. Sola, also accompanied by Tars Tarkas, her father, who before all his chieftains had acknowledged her as his daughter. 3 weeks later, Mors Kajak and his officers, accompanied by Tars Tarkas and Sola, returned upon a battleship that had been dispatched to Thark to fetch them in time for the ceremony, which made Deja Thoris and John Carter one. It's probably the marriage ceremony? Yeah, probably the marriage ceremony. That's my guess. For 9 years I served in the councils and fought in the armies of Helium as a prince of the house of Tardos Mors. The people seemed never to tire of heaping honors upon me, and no day passed that did not bring some new proof of their love for my princess, the incomparable Deja Thoris. In a golden incubator upon the roof of our palace lay a snow-white egg. For nearly 5 years, 10 soldiers of the Jedak's guard had constantly stood over it, and not a day passed when I was in the city that Deja Thoris and I did not stand hand in hand before our little shrine, planning for the future when the delicate shell should break. Okay, that's crazy. So humans and Martians can interbreed. Martians don't have live births. Humans very much do. But they can somehow interbreed. Interesting. Oh, mind you, it's not like the gestation period is really identical to anything on Earth. Just like those eggs are kind of, maybe they're depositable wombs, right? The female grows a womb rather than an egg, which is just protected by an eggshell, and that womb is then delivered. You know what I mean? Yeah, let's go with that. Vivid in my memory is the picture of the last night as we sat there talking in low tones of the strange romance which had woven our lives together, and of this wonder which was coming to augment our happiness and fulfill our hopes. In the distance, we saw the bright white light of an approaching airship, but we attached no special significance to so common a sight. Like a bolt of lightning, it raced toward helium until its very speed bespoke the unusual. Flashing the signals which proclaimed it as a dispatch bearer for the Jadak, it circled impatiently, awaiting the tardy patrol boat which must convey it to the palace docks. 10 minutes after it touched at the palace, a message called me to the council chamber, which I found filling with the members of that body. On the raised platform of the throne was Tardos Mors, pacing back and forth with tense, drawn face. When all were there in their seats, he turned toward us. "This morning," he said, "word reached several governments of Barsoom that the keeper of the atmosphere plant had made no wireless report for 2 days, nor had almost ceaseless calls upon him from a score of capitals elicited a sign of response. The ambassadors of the other nations asked us to take the matter in hand and hastened the assistant keeper to the plant. All day, 1,000 cruisers have been searching for him until just now one of them returns bearing his dead body, which was found in the pits beneath his house, horribly mutilated by some assassin. I do not need to tell you what this means to Barsoom. It would take months to penetrate those mighty walls. In fact, the work has already commenced, and there would be little to fear were the engine of the pumping plant to run as it should, and as they all have for hundreds of years. But the worst we fear has happened. The instruments show a rapidly decreasing air pressure in all parts of Barsoom. The engine has stopped. My gentlemen," he concluded, "we have at best 3 days to live. The end of Mars has cometh." There was absolute silence for several minutes, and then a young noble arose, and with his drawn sword held high above his head, addressed Tardos Mors. "The men of Helium have prided themselves that they have ever shown Barsoom how a nation of red men should live. Now it is our opportunity to show them how they should die. Let us go about our duties as though 1,000 useful years still lay before us." The chamber rang with applause, and as there was nothing better to do than to allay the fears of the people by our example, we went our ways with smiles upon our faces and sorrow gnawing at our hearts. When I returned to my palace, I found that the rumor had already reached Deja Thoris, so I told her all that I had heard. "We have been very happy, John Carter," she said, "and I think whatever fate overtakes us, that it permits us to die together. Except John Carter damn well knows he can get inside that stupid fucking building pretty fucking easy." The next 2 days, you didn't tell anybody, we waited. The next 2 days brought no noticeable change in the supply of air, but on the morning of the 3rd day, breathing became difficult at the higher altitudes of the rooftops. The avenues and plazas of Helium were filled with people. All business had ceased. For the most part, the people looked bravely into the face of their unalterable doom. Here and there, however, men and women gave way to quiet grief. Toward the middle of the day, many of the weaker commenced to succumb, and within an hour, the people of Barsoom were sinking by thousands into the unconsciousness which precedes death by asphyxiation, which you could solve by going and opening up the atmosphere plant. That you know how to do. Deja Thoris and I, with the other members of the royal family, had collected in a sunken garden within an inner courtyard of the palace. We conversed in low tones, when we conversed at all, and the awe of the grim shadow of death crept over us. Even Wula seemed to feel the weight of the impending calamity, for he pressed close to Deja Thoris and to me, whining pitifully. The little incubator had been brought from the roof of our palace at request of Deja Thoris, and she sat gazing longingly upon the unknown little life that now she would never know, but would likely be born only to die of suffocation. As it was becoming perceptibly difficult to breathe, Tardos Mors arose, saying, "Let us bid each other farewell. The days of the greatness of Barsoom are over. Tomorrow's sun will look down upon a dead world which, through all eternity, must go swinging through the heavens, peopled not even by memories. It is the end." He stooped and kissed the women of his family, and laid his strong hand upon the shoulders of the men. As I turned sadly from him, my eyes fell upon Deja Thoris. Her head was drooping upon her breast, and to all appearances she was lifeless. With a cry, I sprang to her and raised her in my arms. Her eyes opened and looked into mine. "Kiss me, John Carter," she murmured. "I love you. I love you. It is cruel that we must be torn apart, who are just starting upon a life of love and happiness." As I pressed her dear lips to mine, the old feeling of unconquerable power and authority rose in me. The fighting blood of Virginia sprang to life in my veins. "It shall not be, my princess," I cried. There must be some way, and John Carter, who has fought his way through a strange world of love, for love of you, will find it. And if only you had said that 2 days ago, before people started dying. With my words, there crept above the threshold of my conscious mind a series of 9 long forgotten sounds. Like a flash of lightning in the darkness, their full purport dawned upon me. The key to the 3 great doors of the atmosphere plant. Turning suddenly toward Tardos Mors, as I still clasped my dying love to my breast, I cried, "A flyer, Jadak, quick! Order your swiftest flyer to the palace top. I can save Barsoom yet." He did not wait to question, but in an instant a guard was racing to the nearest dock, and gasping probably, and though the air was thin and almost gone at the rooftop, they managed to launch the fastest one-man air scout machine that the skill of Barsoom had ever produced. Yeah, he forgot until now. At the last minute, the 9th hour, or whatever it is, yeah, this is crazy. Also, if there's no air, you will pass out. And no, it doesn't matter what you remember at that point. Kissing Deja Thoris a dozen times and commanding Wula, who would have followed me, to remain and guard her, I bounded with my old agility and strength to the high ramparts of the palace, and in another moment I was headed toward the goal of the hopes of all Barsoom. Hopefully there is also a way to figure out how to restart the pumps. I had to fly low to get sufficient air to breathe. Thank you, author, for thinking of that. But I took a straight course across an old sea bottom, and so had to rise only a few feet above the ground. I traveled with awful velocity, for my errand was a race against time with death. The face of Deja Thoris hung always before me as I turned for a last look as I left the palace garden. I had seen her stagger and sink upon the ground beside the little incubator. that she had dropped into the last coma which would end in death if the air supply remained unreplenished. I well knew, and so, throwing caution to the winds, I flung overboard everything but the engine and compass, even to my ornaments, and lying on my belly along the deck with one hand on the steering wheel, and the other pushing the speed lever to its last notch, I split the thin air of the dying Mars with the speed of a meteor. An hour before dark, the great walls of the atmosphere plant loomed suddenly before me, and with a sickening thud, I plunged to the ground before the small door which was withholding the spark of life from the inhabitants of an entire planet. Beside the door, a great crew of men had been laboring to pierce the wall, but they had scarcely scratched the flint-like surface, and now most of them lay in the last sleep from which not even air would awaken them. Conditions seemed much worse here than at Helium. It was with difficulty that I breathed at all, and there were a few men still conscious, and to one of these I spoke. "If I can open these doors, is there a man who can start the engines?" I asked. "I can," he replied. "If you open quickly, I can last but a few moments more, but it is useless. They are both dead, and no one else upon Barsoom knew the secret of these awful locks. For 3 days, men crazed with fear have surged about this portal in vain attempts to solve its mystery." I had no time to talk. I was becoming very weak, and it was with difficulty that I controlled my mind at all. But with a final effort, as I sank weakly to my knees, I hurled the 9 thought waves at that awful thing before me. The Martian had crawled to my side, and with staring eyes fixed on the single panel before us, we waited in silence, in the silence of death. Slowly, the mighty door receded before us. I attempted to rise and follow it, but I was too weak. "After it," I cried to my companion. "If you reach the pump room, turn loose all the pumps. It is the only chance Barsoom has to exist tomorrow." From where I lay, I opened the second door, and then the third. And as I saw the hope of Barsoom crawling weakly on hands and knees through the last doorway, I sank unconscious upon the ground. Chapter 28. At the Arizona Cave. It was dark when I opened my eyes again. Strange, stiff garments were upon my body, garments that cracked and powdered away from me as I rose to a sitting posture. I felt myself over from head to foot, and from head to foot I was clothed, though when I fell unconscious at the little doorway I had been naked. Before me was a small patch of moonlit sky, which showed through a ragged aperture. As my hands passed over my body, they came in contact with pockets, and one of these a small parcel of matches wrapped in oiled paper. One of these matches I struck, and its dim flame lighted up what appeared to be a huge cave, toward the back of which I discovered a strange, still figure huddled over a tiny bench. As I approached it, I saw that it was the dead, mummified remains of a little old woman with long black hair, and the thing it leaned over was a small charcoal burner, upon which rested a round copper vessel containing a small quantity of greenish powder. Behind her, depending from the roof upon rawhide thongs and stretching entirely across the cave, was a row of human skeletons. From the thong which held them stretched another to the dead hand of the little old woman. As I touched the cord, the skeleton swung to the motion with a noise as of the rustling of dry leaves. It was a most grotesque and horrid tableau as I hastened out into the fresh air, glad to escape from so gruesome a place. The sight that met my eyes as I stepped out upon the small ledge which ran before the entrance of the cave filled me with consternation. A new heaven and a new landscape met my gaze. The silvered mountains in the distance, the almost stationary moon hanging in the sky, the cacti-studded valley below me were not of Mars. I could scarce believe my eyes, but the truth slowly forced itself upon me. I was looking upon Arizona from the same ledge which 10 years before I had gazed with longing upon Mars. Burying my head in my arms, I turned, broken and sorrowful, down the trail from the cave. Above me shone the red eye of Mars, holding her awful secret. 48 million miles away. Did the Martian reach the pump room? Did the vitalizing air reach the people of that distant planet in time to save them? Was my Deja Thoris alive? Or did her beautiful body lie cold in death beside the tiny golden incubator in the sunken garden of the inner courtyard of the palace of Tardos Mors, the Jeddak of Helium? Yeah, is my wife alive? Do I have a child? Cruel fate. For 10 years I have waited and prayed for an answer to my questions. For 10 years I have waited and prayed to be taken back to the world of my lost love. I would rather lie dead beside her than dead beside her there, than live on Earth all those millions of terrible miles from her. The old mine, which I found untouched, has made me fabulously wealthy. No one found that in 10 years, but what care I for wealth? As I sit here tonight in my little study overlooking the Hudson, just 20 years have elapsed since I first opened my eyes upon Mars. If you didn't care about wealth, you wouldn't have it, so apparently you do care about wealth. I can see her shining in the sky through the little window by my desk, and tonight she seems calling to me again as she had not called before since that long dead night, and I think I can see, across that awful abyss of space, a beautiful black-haired woman standing in the garden of a palace, and at her side is a little boy who puts his arm around her as she points into the sky toward the planet Earth, while at their feet is a huge and hideous creature with a heart of gold. I believe that they are waiting for me, and something tells me that I shall soon know. But we won't, because thus is the end of the book. I mean, unless you want to go through the licensing agreement stuff, but that's not for me. Updated editions will replace the previous one. Old editions will remain will be renamed. Of course they will. I don't care. How sad. I had a thought about this book, this story, and I'm desperately trying to remember what it is. I mean, there are sequels and they are public domain. Yeah, there are sequels, which means something has to happen. I kind of asking, why did he come back home? Why the 10-year, return to Earth if he's just going to go back for the sequel? I mean, if this is where the book actually ended, that's a very dramatic change, right? Leaving everyone in a massive, question mark. It's kind of cathartic. And if it had no sequel, that would be pretty cool. He has no control over it, but the author does, Valana. I get that he has no control over it. We don't even know what it is. It is a mystical event that is just, as far as I can tell, nothing more than a function for the plot, for the narrative to send our character from Earth to Mars. So take our war hero. Let's not investigate that phrase too closely, and put him in a world he's completely out of his element, but he's literally isekai'd to Mars, but he has a special power. He can jump, and then all of a sudden he's back on Earth. And then presumably, I don't know, of course, there's a sequel, and there's this hint at the end of this book that he's just going to go back to Mars. He came home, got rich for over 10 years, and then he's just going back. If he does go back, I imagine, I'm not interested in finding out right now. I imagine what happens is Deja Tharis, whatever her name is, and the boy or girl, who knows, and have moved on with their lives. He is departed. He died. In his final act, he saved Mars. Perhaps. There was a great death. Mind you, a lot of people died already. But he saved the remnants of Mars who have fallen further into war because of all the death and the lack of people and the ability to sustain things, right? There's going to be chaos on that planet now. The next one is called Gods of Mars. Okay, so it's definitely going back to Mars time. So that's probably what's going to happen there. Like the author didn't know if he would get to write another. Yeah, that's the feeling I get here. And there are a lot of series and stories and stuff, especially in anime, right, where you have a season 1 and there's no promise of a second season. So it kind of wraps up. And then the writers are desperate for story threads. So they kind of, well, in some cases, they just repeat the plot lines. Other cases, they're desperately looking for ways to extend it. Their only advantage there, right, is in real life, there's no such thing as the end of a story. There's no happily ever after. There's always tomorrow. Something will happen tomorrow, and something will happen after that. But that said, in a story, there is a happily ever after. There is a conclusion. You tie up the knots for a satisfying story to, because the moral of the story has been stated and has been completely stated, and there's no need to go on. So hey, guess what, guys? Your favorite characters are going to live happily ever after, and we can walk away feeling happy. Or vice versa. They all died, and you walk away at the end of a dark story with a different kind of satisfaction, more of a cathartic one. So, but then you come back. And like, oh no, but wait, this happened instead. And it's kind of like, okay, well, it's kind of a little disingenuous. Now we're back into the story and our happy ending is no longer our happy ending. So that feels a little janky because now you have to continue the story. And those sequels, those follow-ups can be very, very easily badly done, right? It's very easy to do them badly. And so if we ever do get back to the sequel of The Princess of Mars, it will be interesting to see how well it's done. Yeah. Oh, one thing I did appreciate about this book is how it didn't linger on the fighting, right? There was enough attention given to the fighting and the war to like, yeah, this was a big battle. It was great. There were lots of heroics, and we get on with the story, right? We advance the next plot line. There was a lot of, I suspect, I could be wrong, but I wouldn't be surprised if you told me that the author kind of came up with story elements like the atmosphere plant dying. And then he's like, you know what? I need a way for John Carter to save the day. How is he going to know anything about this atmosphere plant? Oh, wait a minute. What if I go back in the story and just have him stumble across this plant on his journey between one place and another? And I can give him some information about where to go, yada, yada, yada. Arm him with some information. And then, because if you think about it, that atmosphere plant, if you removed it from the story, wouldn't really have changed anything. Oh, how did he know where to go? Well, he could have stumbled in the right direction. How many other coincidences have occurred in this book, right? There are elements of this book that could just be taken out, and the story, the larger plot, the love story, if you will, would remain unaffected. The wars and the battles and the political shenanigans would remain unaffected. Just at the end of this book, there's this like planetary threat that lasts for like 2/3 of a chapter. Or maybe one. It is like there was all in one chapter. The whole Mars is dying. Oh wait, I can save it, but only after 3 days. So, who knows if they really survived? But I appreciate the way the book ended, leaving it on that. Is he really going back? Is he just heartbroken? It's been 10 years. He just really desperately wants to go back. and then we're over. Yeah, I liked it. It's a good story. It wasn't terribly difficult to read either, so that's always good. Yes, we appreciate that. But we can put a close to A Princess of Mars, and we are probably going to end there for tonight. I know it's like 9:30, and we could technically read for another half hour, but this is probably a good place to like. We can start the next book next stream, and I do got to get up a little early, so going to bed a little late would be nice. And I can get I can get a shower in tonight maybe. Yeah. So on Earth, he is a weird millionaire bachelor who has a family that no one knows about, I guess. Yeah, I guess he wouldn't have. Like apparently he never got over Tharja, or Deja. Sorry, Deja Tharis, and yeah, it's just he's like Batman, except he doesn't go out with girls. Afraid of commitment, after having been very committed. Yes, I have to talk to Shikamoto about my mouth movements. I like the ones on this model, and I hate the ones on the other one. Something feels very, very different. Oh, here in my hand. All right, let's slip back here.